So hey, what's up guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video we are going to see what if Naruto become a cursed spirit king with Succubus Harem. So this is a movie, and if you want more movies like this or videos like this, then please make sure to leave a like, share and subscribe. Also, I have divided this video in 6 chapter, so it will easy to track you down. Track the video down. So yeah, without wasting any more time, let's jump right back into the video.
Chapter 1. The Valley of Unbecoming. The Valley of the End had always been a place built for absolutes. Two stone titans stood above the river in eternal accusation, one hand raised in seal, the other resting on a sword hilt, as if even the mountains themselves remembered that peace had never been anything more than a truce between stronger wars. Water thundered between them in white sheets, splitting around jagged rock and plunging into depths black enough to swallow moonlight. The valley was a monument to collisions, ideals against ambition, brother against brother, promise against inevitability. Tonight it became a grave. Rain came first. Not the soft sort that cooled summer earth, but a hard, slanting downpour that struck stone like thrown needles. The clouds above were swollen and low, dragging the sky downward until it felt as though the world itself were bowing its head to witness what would happen here. Lightning crawled somewhere far away, hidden in the clouds like a beast turning over in its sleep. On the shattered surface of the valley's great lake, two boys staggered through the wreckage of their last exchange. They were no longer really boys, not after everything behind them, not after blood and betrayal and the weight of names larger than themselves, but there was something cruelly young in the way they swayed on their feet. Their clothes were torn. Their skin was striped with cuts and bruises. Their breathing came ragged and hot in the cold rain. Naruto Uzumaki could taste iron. It filled his mouth, thick and bitter, running from a split lip and something deeper inside. He had been hit too many times to count. His right arm trembled whenever he tried to lift it. One side of his face throbbed in time with his heartbeat. The orange and black of his jacket was so dark with rain and blood it no longer looked like either color. Across from him, Sasuke Uchiha stood like a blade forced to remain upright purely through hatred. His curse-marked power had begun to ebb. The monstrous edges of it flickered at the corners of his outline and vanished. His chest rose and fell in sharp, controlled motions, but even he couldn't completely hide the exhaustion gnawing at him. His hair clung wetly to his forehead. Blood ran from his shoulder and down his wrist, dripping from lax fingers. For a moment neither moved. The rain fell between them, stitching silver lines through the distance. Naruto stared at Sasuke through water and pain, and all the things he still didn't know how to say. "I'm not giving up," he said. The words came rough, scraped raw from somewhere lower than his throat. He had shouted so much tonight that his voice no longer sounded like his own. But the meaning in it was unchanged, stubborn, furious, desperate enough to be mistaken for faith. Sasuke's eyes, dark as the storm, did not soften. "You still don't understand," he said. Naruto laughed once. It was a broken sound. "Then make me." The silence after that was not empty. It was full of every memory that had dragged them here. The hospital roof, the training grounds, the missions, the moments of almost brotherhood neither of them had ever known how to keep. It was full of the things unsaid, because saying them would have made them real. Full of the love that had calcified into rivalry, and the rivalry that had always hidden something more afraid beneath it. Sasuke moved first. He came forward in a blur of black and white, sandals skimming water, fingers crackling with gathered lightning. Chidori screamed into existence around his hand, a nest of blue-white birds shrieking in one voice sharp enough to cut the air. The light from it turned the rain ghost pale and etched Sasuke's face into something almost inhuman, not demonic, not monstrous, just utterly resolved. Naruto's breath hitched. Kurama's chakra had nearly run dry. He could feel only a flicker of it left in the seal, a red ember behind the bars, too distant and tired to rise like it once had. No time, no strength, no room to think, only instinct. He lunged too, not with elegance, not with precision. Naruto had never been beautiful in battle. He was momentum, refusal, force of will-given limbs. He drove forward with his ruined arm tucked close and his left hand reaching, as if he could still seize Sasuke's wrist and drag them both back from the cliff edge they had already stepped over. Then the world narrowed to one point of light. The Chidori struck. Naruto had imagined pain before in battle, in loneliness, in childhood nights so empty they seemed to echo. He had thought he understood what it meant for something to hurt. He had not. This was not pain as a sensation. This was pain as revelation. For one endless instant, it felt as though something inside him had been split with surgical cruelty. Not flesh, not bone, something deeper, something more final. He felt the attack not in his chest, but through the architecture of his being, as if the lightning had found a hidden seam in him and pried it open. His body jerked violently. Water exploded around them. Sasuke's expression changed just for a fraction of a second, just enough to reveal surprise. Because the strike had gone wrong, or right, in the worst possible sense. The Chidori had not pierced where Sasuke intended. It had landed slightly off-center, glancing across ribs and muscle, but what it severed lay nowhere a surgeon could name. Naruto felt it go. A thread, burning bright, snapping in silence, his destiny. He did not have language for that in the moment. Could not have. All he knew was that something which had held him together through misery, through hope, through hunger and dream and stubbornness, and every impossible promise had been cut. The world made a sound like glass cracking underwater. Sasuke ripped his hand free. Naruto stumbled backward. He saw the shock on Sasuke's face, saw him reach out instinctively, as if too late realizing he had struck something neither of them understood. Then Naruto's heel hit empty space. The edge of the broken rock gave way beneath him. He fell. The river accepted him with brutal indifference. Cold swallowed everything. Sound vanished beneath the roaring surface. The shock of the water slammed into his wound and blew the last of the air from his lungs. For a moment he sank without motion, orange cloth drifting like torn flame in the dark current. Above him, the sky was a fractured blur of gray and silver. Below him, depth. Naruto floated between them, and somewhere inside, the thing that had been cut continued to unravel. In the darkness behind his navel, a gate groaned. The seal that held the 9-tailed fox had never been a place Naruto entered gently. Every time he had found himself here before, it had been through anger or desperation, through violence and demand. It was always wet underfoot, always dimly lit by a strange orange glow that felt less like light than a warning. Massive bars rose before him, and behind them waited eyes ancient enough to make human fury feel childish. Tonight the place was different. The corridor of his mind shuddered as if struck by an earthquake from within. Water ran black instead of red. Cracks of strange pale gold threaded the walls. The air smelled wrong, not like rust and chakra and animal heat, but like storm-burned metal, like incense lit in a graveyard. Kurama was already there, pressed close to the bars. His eyes were open. That alone was enough to make the space feel doomed. The fox's vast pupils narrowed as Naruto stumbled into view. One hand clamped over the place where there should have been only pain, but instead there was absence. A cold hollowness widening. Naruto looked up, confusion and fury mixing in him. "Do something," he choked out. He hated how desperate he sounded. Kurama did not sneer, did not laugh. That frightened Naruto more than anything else could have. The fox studied him with an expression too old for anger, too old for contempt. It was the look of something that had watched mountains become dust and found no comfort in being right. "He cut it," Kurama said. Naruto blinked. "Cut what?" "The path." The words rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. Naruto stared at him, breathing hard. "I don't care what he cut," he snapped. "Fix it." Kurama's tails lashed once behind him, each movement sending ripples through the black water pooled across the seal space. "You think this is flesh, brat? Think this is a bone I can mend with chakra and time?" Naruto opened his mouth, then stopped. Because he could feel it. Now that the fox had named it, he could feel the shape of the wound more clearly. It was not bleeding, it was not broken, it was separation. A line of force that had always pulled him forward toward bonds, toward choice, toward struggle that meant something had been torn free. And where it should have been was a gap hungry enough to swallow thought. Kurama lowered his massive head. "For all your foolishness, for all your noise, you were anchored," the fox said, "to a human future, to pain that remained human because it still bent toward others, that lightning severed it." Naruto's knees hit the water. "No," he said, his voice was smaller now. "No." He thought suddenly of Uruka's hand on his head, of Sakura's annoyed smile, of Kakashi pretending not to care and caring anyway, of ramen steam, of sunlight on Konoha rooftops, of stupid missions and stupid arguments, and every tiny thing he had survived for without ever knowing how fragile the thread between survival and self might be. "No." The chamber shook with the force of the word. Kurama closed his eyes. For the first time since Naruto had known him, the Nine Tails looked tired, not weakened, not beaten, tired in a way that belonged to centuries, tired in the marrow of existence. "When humans are broken," the fox said quietly, "they always reach for meaning before truth." Naruto stared up at him, water trembling around his clenched fists. "What truth?" Kurama opened his eyes again, and in them Naruto saw something terrible, not cruelty but decision. "That your world is made of suffering," the fox said, "and suffering does not vanish because you name one child hero." The seal groaned again. Deep beyond Kurama, in spaces Naruto had never been allowed to perceive, other sounds began to stir, whispers, cries, fragments of pain older than him. Not the fox, not even chakra, something heavier, colder. Human in the way curses were human, born from emotion but emptied of mercy. Kurama lifted one massive paw and placed it against the bars. "For generations they used us," he said. "Beasts, weapons, prisoners, symbols. You and I were never meant to be companions. We were made into one by cruelty and called it fate." Naruto shook his head. "Why are you saying this?" "Because you are dying." The words landed without echo. Naruto's breath caught. Somewhere far away above, outside, in the river his body was sinking. He could feel it now. The cold, the dark, the failing rhythm of his heart. "But that is not the only thing happening," Kurama continued. "Something else has opened." The cracks in the chamber walls spread, from them seeped lightless mist, and within that mist were voices. Thousands of them. No language at first, just grief stripped to sound, screams cut short, children crying, mothers praying to no answer, the rasp of hatred repeated over generations until it became a kind of liturgy. Naruto recoiled. "What is that?" Kurama's tails curled around himself like a cloak. "The residue of those who came before you," he said. "Jinchuriki, vessels, sacrifices, not only mine, all of them. Every human who carried hatred inside their body because your world found that easier than facing itself." Naruto could not breathe. The mist thickened. In it he glimpsed faces half-formed and dissolving, eyes hollowed by fear, mouths open in fury, figures kneeling in chains of sealing formula, loneliness so dense it felt like pressure against the skin. This isn't chakra." "No," Kurama's voice dropped lower still. "This is what chakra leaves behind when it rots inside grief." The chamber floor split open. Black water rushed downward into a depth with no visible bottom, and from that abyss rose a force Naruto had no frame for. Negative emotion, yes, but not as a passing feeling. This was concentrated despair. Malice sedimented over generations. Hatred given geological age. It touched the edges of Naruto's consciousness, and he screamed. Not from pain. Not at first from recognition, because inside it was everything he had spent his life refusing to become. Every night he had eaten alone. Every look of disgust thrown by villagers who should have seen a child and saw only a weapon. Every humiliation. Every abandoned promise. Every moment he had smiled too brightly so no one would hear the emptiness underneath. All of it was there, mirrored and multiplied by countless others. Not just his pain as inheritance. Kurama watched him endure it. Then the fox asked, softly, "If they had won, if your kindness had changed them, why does this exist at all?" Naruto had no answer. The chamber shook so hard the bars bent. Outside, his heart stuttered. Inside, the gap where destiny had been torn open widened enough to become a doorway. Kurama exhaled. The sound was like a furnace opening. "I can seal you closed," he said. "Force chakra into the wound, keep you alive a little longer. Human, broken, empty." He bared his teeth, but the expression held no triumph. "And you will spend the rest of that life feeling the shape of what was cut out of you." Naruto looked up through tears he did not remember shedding. Or, Kurama's eyes burned, "or I stop pretending your world deserves to be spared the truth of what it made." The mist surged. Naruto felt it coil around him, not touching yet, waiting. "You'd kill me," he whispered. "No," said Kurama, "I would open you." The difference should have mattered. It should have terrified him in a clean, simple way. Instead, Naruto found himself thinking of Konoha's smiling faces that had once looked through him. Of missions done for leaders who would have used him until death and called it honor. Of the weight of being told over and over that if he just endured enough, loved enough, forgave enough, then one day all that hurt would become proof of virtue. A rage unlike any he had known moved inside him, not loud, not hot, cold, ancient. What if there was no reward for being the one who bore everything? What if heroism had only ever been another cage built by people too frightened to face the ugliness of their world unless someone cheerful carried it for them? The thought should have disgusted him. Instead it fit, not perfectly. Not yet, but enough to make the space around him go still. Kurama saw it happen. The fox's expression did not change, but his tails became motionless. "That," he said, almost to himself, "is the first honest thing you've felt all night." Naruto bowed his head. The black mist gathered at the edges of his outline like curious fingers. "If I say yes," he asked, voice cracking, "what happens to me?" Kurama was silent for a long time, then he answered with the mercy of truth. "You will not remain what you are." The chamber darkened until only the fox's eyes and the spreading cracks could be seen. "You will be remade by every hatred you survived and every hatred this world buried. You will feed on what humans radiate when fear strips away their lies. You will never again be able to stand among them without hearing what they really are." Naruto swallowed. "Will I still be me?" Kurama's gaze did not waver. For a while, rain and thunder and river and memory swam together. Naruto thought of Sasuke's face just before he fell, the flash of horror there. He thought of how badly he had wanted to drag one person back from darkness, as if saving one bond could justify all the pain it took to keep reaching. He thought of every version of himself he had tried to become because others needed him to symbolize something. Then he thought of the emptiness where destiny had been. It was not just absence anymore, it was hunger. Naruto lifted his head. Outside, his body drifted downward into the river's black depth. Inside, he looked the nine-tailed fox in the eye. "Open it," he said. Kurama shut his eyes, not in relief, not in grief, something stranger than both. "So be it," he moved. Not physically, not with claws or chakra arms or the raw violence Naruto knew from their past struggles. Kurama laid his paw flat against the bars of the seal, and for the first time since the night Naruto was born, he pushed not outward against confinement, but inward, into the wound. The world vanished. Water ceased to be water. The river around Naruto blackened so completely it seemed to erase the very idea of reflection. The current slowed, then reversed, circling his sinking body in widening rings. Fish fled upstream in frantic schools. Moss on the valley stones turned gray and died in seconds. The rain still fell, but each drop that struck the water spread dark ripples far larger than it should have, as if gravity itself had become uncertain. High above, standing on broken rock at the edge of the lake, Sasuke Uchiha froze. He had seen many impossible things. He had watched men breathe fire, watched monsters tear through armies, watched power distort bodies and names and loyalties until nothing simple remained. But this was different. This was not a jutsu, not a transformation he could parse. not cursed seal madness or tailed beast rage. This felt like a boundary failing. The water where Naruto had fallen was no longer merely dark. It was wrong. It bulged upward in slow pulses, like something enormous breathing beneath it. Lightning flashed above the valley, and for a split second Sasuke saw shapes moving below the surface, not one body, but many, crowding around Naruto's descending form. Human outlines with empty faces, hands reaching not to save, but to welcome. Sasuke stepped back. His instincts screamed at him to run, to flee the valley and never return. Instead, he stood there, chest heaving, unable to look away. "Naruto," he said, and for once the name was not challenge, insult, or accusation. It was warning. The water exploded upward. A pillar of black surged into the storm, carrying Naruto's limp body at its center like a sacrifice lifted to the heavens. But he was not limp for long. The instant the column reached its apex, he arched violently, every muscle in him locked. His mouth opened in a scream the valley did not hear with ears. It was felt. The statues cracked. Hairline fractures ran through the stone faces of Hashirama and Madara, racing down their bodies like spreading frost. Trees on the valley walls withered from green to skeletal brown in the span of breaths. The riverbank grass sagged flat, as if pressed down by invisible hands. The rain hitting Sasuke's skin turned so cold it burned. Naruto hung suspended in the air. Black matter clung to him, seeping into skin, threading into veins, sinking through the old pathways where chakra once coursed. His whisker marks deepened, not lengthening but cutting inward, becoming something nearer ritual scars. Their edges glowed for an instant with the same lightless gold that had begun to form behind his eyelids. Below him, the river churned with faces. Above him, the storm rotated. Then his eyes opened. Sasuke had looked into Naruto's eyes hundreds of times. Blue so bright, they had once seemed ridiculous in someone so reckless. Eyes that wore feeling openly, stupidly, stubbornly, whether that feeling was joy or fury or hurt. Those eyes were gone. What looked back now was void wrapped around gold irises so dark they swallowed the lightning's reflection, ringed by a faint aureate burn like an eclipse caught in human shape. There was recognition in them, memory, but their warmth had been hollowed out and replaced with something that observed rather than belonged. Naruto descended slowly to the water's surface. He did not sink. The black river held him aloft. For a moment he simply stood there, head bowed, rain running down his face. His chest rose once, fell, rose again steadier. When he looked down at his own hands, Sasuke saw no confusion in the gesture, only study, as if Naruto were learning the mechanics of a new weapon or a new body. "Sasuke," Naruto said. His voice had changed, not deeper, not monstrous. That would have been easier. The horror lay in how close it still was to his own, while carrying beneath it a resonance like distant voices speaking the same word from beneath the earth. Sasuke forced chakra into his legs, readying himself. "What are you?" The question snapped across the water sharper than any kunai. Naruto tilted his head. Rain slid from strands of blonde hair now streaked faintly with darkness near the roots, as if shadow were growing upward through him. Behind him, the water thickened, gathering in shapes that almost became figures before collapsing again. The old Naruto would have answered instantly, loudly. Emotion first, thought second. This Naruto considered. Then, with a strange calm, he said, "I don't think the world has a name yet." Sasuke's fingers twitched toward another jutsu, but his body knew before his mind admitted it. He could not win this fight. Not now, maybe not ever. Still, he said, "Naruto, don't." The word was quiet. The valley obeyed it. Every insect sound ceased. The rain seemed suddenly farther away. Even the river's roar dimmed, as though the world had leaned in to listen. Naruto lifted his gaze fully to Sasuke's face. For one unbearable second, Sasuke thought he saw the old him in there, not alive, exactly, but visible. Deep beneath the new stillness. A memory trapped behind glass. Then Naruto smiled. It was not cruel, that made it worse. "You were trying to cut me free," he said. "Weren't you?" Sasuke said nothing. "You thought I was chained to something weak." Naruto looked down at the black water around his feet. Maybe you were right. The air around him began to bend. Not visibly at first. Sasuke felt it before he saw it. Pressure in the skull, a tightening in the lungs, the sudden invasive heat of remembered shame rising uninvited from somewhere buried. He staggered half a step as images hit him, his clan's blood on wood floors, his brother's eyes, his own hand driving lightning through Naruto's body seconds ago. The memories came with unbearable clarity, stripped of all the protective numbness he had built around them. Naruto frowned faintly, as if noticing an unintended side effect. Around him, reeds along the riverbank blackened and curled. "What did you do?" Sasuke demanded. Naruto looked up, and the gold-ringed void of his eyes seemed genuinely curious. "I'm here," he said. "That seems to be enough." A crack split the stone beneath Sasuke's foot. He glanced down and saw it spreading through the rock in branching lines of dark crystal, reality decay. The valley itself was beginning to reject Naruto's presence or surrender to it. Naruto took one step forward on the river's surface, then another. Each step left no ripple, only a brief stain of deeper shadow that lingered longer than it should have. Sasuke backed away despite himself. Naruto stopped. Something unreadable crossed his face. Not pity, not mercy, something like assessment. "You should go," Naruto said. Sasuke's jaw tightened. "I'm not running from you, not from me." Naruto's gaze slid past him, over the shattered valley, toward a distant horizon hidden by storm. "From what comes after this?" Thunder rolled. Behind Naruto, the water rose again, not in one pillar, but in 5 separate masses, each holding a half-formed silhouette before sinking back beneath the surface. Waiting. Watching. Unnamed things in the seams between worlds, sensing an opening. Sasuke saw them and understood with a sick clarity that this night was not an ending. It was the first door. "Come back with me," Sasuke said, and hated how impossible the words sounded even as he said them. Naruto was silent. Rain ran down his face like tears he no longer owned. "Back where?" he asked at last. Sasuke had no answer. Back to Konoha. To the village that had used him, feared him, loved him only after he bled enough to deserve it. Back to friendships built around the assumption that Naruto would always be the one who forgave first. Back to a future just severed by a lightning strike meant to save or destroy depending on who told the story. Naruto watched Sasuke fail to speak. Then he nodded once, as if some final uncertainty had been resolved. "I thought so." The black shapes beneath the water receded. The pressure in the air eased, though only slightly, like a hand lifting from a throat but remaining close. Naruto turned away, not dramatically, not with the theatrical cruelty of a villain claiming a throne. He simply turned as if Sasuke were no longer the center of the moment. As if this battle, once the axis of both their lives, had already become smaller than the thing Naruto was becoming. He began to walk downstream. Each step spread shadow through the river like spilled ink. Sasuke stood rigid on the shattered bank, every instinct torn between attack and paralysis. He should stop him. He knew that with the hard, merciless certainty of a shinobi raised to understand consequences. If Naruto left this valley as whatever he now was, the world would change around the shape of him. But Sasuke also knew this. The person walking away was no longer losing. He was beginning. Naruto reached the bend where mist from the waterfall thickened into a curtain and paused without looking back. "When you see them," he said, voice carrying strangely clearly over the water, "tell them I didn't die." Sasuke's throat tightened. Naruto continued, softer now, almost speaking to himself. "Tell them something opened." Then he stepped into the mist. The valley swallowed him. For a long time, Sasuke did not move. The storm slowly weakened overhead, but the damage remained. Cracks in sacred stone. Dead grass along the banks. Water permanently darkened where Naruto had risen. The air still carried a wrongness that would not wash away with rain. Far below, where the river ran toward forests and roads and villages full of sleeping people, a bruise-colored darkness spread across the surface and kept moving. Sasuke stared after it until dawn began to thin the eastern clouds. Only then did he understand the shape of the fear settling into his bones. Naruto Uzumaki had not been consumed. He had been convinced. And somewhere beyond the valley, walking alone beneath a sky that seemed subtly dimmer than it had the day before, something with Naruto's face was learning how to breathe in a world made almost entirely of suffering. The age of shinobi had not ended yet, but for the first time it had something waiting at its edge, something patient, something hungry, something that no longer needed love to survive. And as the first weak light of morning touched the broken statues and failed to warm them, the valley kept its new secret in silence. A hero had fallen here. What rose in his place had no reason to remain one. Chapter 2. The court of Dark Sovereigns. Naruto walked for 3 days before he understood that hunger had changed. Before, hunger had been a simple thing. It had been a child's empty stomach, a teenager's impossible metabolism, a ramen craving sharp enough to drag him across half the village for a bowl and a laugh and the brief comfort of being recognized by name instead of title. Hunger had been physical, loud, honest. Now it was quieter. And far, far worse, it did not live in his stomach. It lived in the spaces between sounds, in the tremor beneath a stranger's smile, in the shudder of trees when the wind changed direction just before rain. It lived in the ache behind a mother's eyes when she thought of a son on the border, in the clenched jaw of a merchant counting debts by lantern light, in the cold resentment of a farmer staring at a field ruined by taxes, weather, and men too powerful to care. Naruto could feel it all. He crossed the forests beyond the Valley of the End in silence, sandals barely touching the damp earth. He did not travel fast the way a shinobi would, leaping branch to branch in bursts of athletic violence. He moved at a steady walking pace because speed was no longer necessary. Distance had become less solid around him. Space felt thin, as if the world itself were made of stitched fabric, and somewhere between those stitches there were seams only he could see. The first night he tried to sleep. He lay beneath a dead cedar whose needles had turned gray the moment he stepped into its shadow, and he shut his eyes and waited for exhaustion to claim him. It never came. Not because he did not need rest. He did. But rest had stopped being the simple surrender of a tired body. Every time his mind drifted, he heard them, the echoes in the dark opened by Kurama's choice. The sorrow of old vessels, the bitterness of abandoned dead, fragments of ancient curses pressed thin as breath. By the second night, he stopped trying. By the third, he understood that this was not a condition to endure. It was a nature to accept. He stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a nameless valley, somewhere beyond Fire Country's safer roads, where mist pooled thick between black pines and the bones of old shrines jutted from the earth like rotted teeth. Once, some minor lord had likely built a temple here to guard a mountain pass. Once, monks had burned incense on stone steps and prayed against disaster. Now the shrine was broken. Its torii gate leaned sideways. Its main hall had collapsed inward years ago. Moss had swallowed carvings of protective spirits. Time and neglect had hollowed the place out until only shape remained, stripped of sanctity. Naruto looked down into it and felt something stir, not in himself, in the space. The air below was crowded. Not visibly, no immediate specters, no obvious monsters creeping through fog, but saturated. The valley was full of leftovers. Human fear, old betrayal, buried rage. Generations of travelers had passed this way carrying grief into battlefields, and some of that grief had never left. It had seeped into wood and stone and root, fed by every death that followed. If the Valley of the End had been a wound torn open by force, this ruined shrine was different. It was a scar. And scars, Naruto suspected, knew how to keep secrets. He descended without sound. As he stepped through the tilted torii gate, the wood groaned and split. Not all at once. Slowly, reverently, as though acknowledging him. The fog thickened around his legs. Somewhere in the valley a fox barked once, sharply, then fled into deeper dark. Naruto reached the cracked courtyard at the shrine's center and stopped. The old offering altar still stood there, half collapsed, its surface blackened by ancient fire. Someone had once carved prayers into its edges. Naruto placed a hand over them and found that he could no longer read them as words. He read them as residue desperation sealed into grooves. Pleading hardened into ritual, he drew his hand away. The stone beneath his feet had begun to frost over with a thin film of black crystal. The hunger inside him sharpened, not because there were humans nearby. There were none. No village within miles, no travelers on the mountain path. No living fear to feed on. This hunger wanted structure, a center, a place from which to become. Naruto lifted his head and looked at the broken hall beyond the courtyard. Its roof had caved in years ago, leaving a jagged hole through which the dim sky stared down. Inside, the remains of a large seated statue were barely visible through shadow. A guardian deity split at the chest and missing its face. Its hands still rested in its lap. Patient, headless. Waiting, for some reason that made Naruto smile, he walked inside. The floorboards should have creaked, but most of them disintegrated at the touch of his feet before sound could form. Dust rose and hung motionless in the air around him. The headless statue loomed at the far end of the hall, cracked by time and weather, yet somehow still imposing. Naruto stood before it and felt the valley around the shrine fold inward. The seam between worlds was thin here, not open. Not yet, but thin enough to hear what lay behind it. Whispers slid through the air. At first they came from everywhere: floor, walls, ceiling, his own shadow. Then they gathered toward the ruined statue's chest, where the crack running through its torso widened with a faint grinding sound. Black mist leaked from the split stone, not rising upward but flowing sideways, unnatural as spilled ink in water. Naruto did not move. The crack widened further. From inside the hollow statue came a sound like distant temple bells struck underwater, followed by a voice too faint to belong fully to this world. "You returned to a wound on purpose." Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly. The voice was feminine, but not human. It carried no breath, no muscle, no warmth. It sounded like remembrance given speech. "I was looking for a place to stop," he said. A pause. Then the mist inside the statue swirled into the outline of a face that never fully resolved. Places like this are not for stopping. The broken hall dimmed another shade. Outside, birds burst from the trees in panicked flocks. They are for calling. Naruto was silent. He could feel other attentions now. Not one presence, but several, circling the edges of the seam like predators testing a boundary they had long been forbidden to cross. Old things. Not tailed beasts. Not human ghosts. Not the simple phantoms common in stories whispered to academy children. These belonged to catastrophes, the fear of famine, the despair of cities swallowed by plague, the hatred that outlived dynasties, concepts that had learned to wear shape. Kurama's voice rose faintly from somewhere deeper in Naruto's being, not speaking aloud so much as vibrating through shared existence. "You feel them?" Naruto did not answer with words. Yes, he felt them, not as threats exactly. Threat implied opposition. These were not opposed to him. They were interested. Drawn to the vacancy in the world where his severed destiny had once kept him anchored. Drawn to the malice resonance pouring from him in slow, irresistible currents. Drawn to the fact that, for the first time in centuries, something alive had become compatible with what waited between death and memory. The feminine voice returned, clearer now. "You stand at a threshold with no banner, no title, no court, yet the dark has already begun to lean toward you." The statue split fully down the middle, stone collapsed outward. The thing inside stepped free. She was tall. That was the first fact his mind gave her, because it was the simplest, tall enough that the ruined doorway framed her like architecture. The rest took longer to understand. Her form wore the silhouette of a woman in layered ceremonial robes, but those robes were made of ash-colored petals or tattered funeral banners. Naruto couldn't tell which, because they shifted whenever he looked directly at them. Her hair was impossibly long, floating around her as if submerged. Her face was almost beautiful, but beauty felt like the wrong word. It implied softness, invitation, humanity. She had none. Her features were elegant in the way an old blade is elegant, refined toward one purpose. Where her eyes should have been, there were hollows full of pale, drowning light. When she moved, the temperature in the hall dropped. She inclined her head just slightly. "I am Yurei no Hana," she said. "What remains when grief is worshipped long enough that it becomes a god?" Naruto met her gaze without flinching. The old him would have demanded answers instantly. Name, allegiance, threat level, plan. The new stillness in him preferred observation. He noted the way the space around her bent inward with memory, not physical force, psychological gravity. To stand too close to her would be to remember every loss one had ever hidden from oneself. Behind her, the crack between worlds widened another breadth, more silhouettes. One was thin and angular, almost insectile, as though made of fractured brushstrokes and smoke. Another broader, armored in shards that glimmered like broken teeth. Another was simply a man-shaped absence that made the eye slide away from it. Another loomed like a starving bird wrapped in black robes, its limbs too long and folded wrong. And another remained unseen, present only as rots spreading through the walls. Naruto looked from one to the next. "So this is what was waiting," he said. Yurei no Hana's pale hollows brightened, not waiting. Enduring, the second figure stepped through. He wore the shape of a court official from some forgotten era, tall hat, layered robes, hands tucked into sleeves, but all of it was collapsing as he stood there, edges shedding dust, gold embroidery fading and reappearing with every breath. His face was old parchment stretched over a skull too sharp to be human, and his eyes were closed. Yet Naruto felt himself being evaluated more thoroughly than he had ever been by Kakashi, Jiraiya, or any battlefield enemy. The figure bowed exactly as much as protocol demanded, and not a fraction more. "Komai," he said. His voice sounded like a castle settling into ruin, steward of collapse, keeper of the moment when foundations realize they were always temporary. The third emerged with no ceremony at all. He kicked aside fallen stone and stalked into the hall like a warlord who had long ago killed whatever god presided over caution. Massive shoulders, wild hair that rose like black flame, skin marked with jagged crimson lines that shifted like living wounds. In his hand he carried a weapon that kept changing: halberd, cleaver, axe, spear, each version ugly and perfect for killing. He grinned at Naruto. It was a grin made entirely of appetite. "Tessen," he said. "Wrath-given armor. I break discipline and call it truth." The fourth figure did not seem to step through at all. One moment there was empty space near the ruined columns. The next, there was a person-shaped gap where presence should have been. Their body was swathed in plain dark cloth with no ornament, no identifying mark. Face covered, hands gloved. Even the outline of them felt incomplete, as if memory refused to retain detail. Naruto stared and understood instantly that to look away might mean forgetting they were there altogether. When they spoke, the voice was flat and disturbingly gentle. "Mume." The space where names go when the world decides not to keep them. Last came the tall, bird-like thing. It unfolded itself from the darkness near the ceiling beams, descending with a slow, jointed precision that made every instinct in a human body recoil. Its robes were made of black feathers slick with some oil-dark sheen, and beneath the cowl its face was not a face at all but a smooth, ivory mask split by a vertical mouth full of delicate needle teeth. Its hands ended in elegant claws. Wherever it looked, color drained slightly from wood and stone. It bowed with surprising grace. "Kurohane," it hissed. Hunger that learned patience. The hall fell silent. 5 beings stood before Naruto in the broken shrine, and the seam behind them pulsed like an open wound in the world. If a shinobi had seen this scene, they would have named it a summoning or an invasion. They would have asked which technique, whose control, what sacrifice. Naruto understood now that those questions belonged to a narrower universe. What stood before him were not creatures forced into obedience. They had come because his existence had become legible to theirs. Yurei no Hana studied him. "You are not what we expected." Naruto tilted his head. "What did you expect?" Komai answered this time, his shut eyes somehow sharper than any stare, a beast wearing a child's body, a vessel split by anguish. An accident of tailed chakra and human failure. Tessin laughed, rough and delighted. Instead we get a king in the making. That's new. Naruto said nothing. He was still adjusting to the fact that the word did not repel him. King, not Hokage, not hero, not savior. Those titles had always been built around service, around smiling beneath burdens and calling the weight purpose. King was different. It implied center. Authority. The world ordered around a will rather than a plea. Yurei Nohana stepped closer, the hall dimmed around her. In her presence, Naruto caught flashes of things he had not thought of in years, a swing creaking empty in the academy yard. Villagers turning away from him at festival stalls. Knights staring at apartment ceilings and wondering whether being ignored hurt more than being hated. Grief rose unbidden, not weakening him but clarifying something. She saw that it did not unmake him. Interesting, she murmured. You came to test me, Naruto said. Kurohane's teeth clicked softly. Everything worthy is tested. Then do it. The temperature dropped to freezing. For the first time, all five focused fully on him. Tessin moved first. There was no signal, no theatrical declaration. One moment he stood 10 paces away, the next his shifting weapon was already descending toward Naruto's skull with enough force to split stone and memory alike. Naruto did not dodge. He raised one hand. The weapon struck a veil of black gold distortion inches above his skin and stopped dead. Not blocked, denied. Tessin's grin widened as pressure rippled through the hole, cracking the remaining floorboards outward in concentric circles. Good. The wrath spirit growled. Then he attacked for real. The ruined shrine vanished into violence. Tessin became a storm of battlefield fury, every strike carrying not only mass but the emotional momentum of slaughter itself. Each swing dragged phantom echoes behind it, armies charging, commanders screaming, brothers killing brothers because rage had become easier than grief. Naruto moved through it with unsettling economy, not the wild improvisation of his old taijutsu, but a new precision born of reading intent before motion. Because wrath was loud, easy to hear. Every blow Tessin made declared itself in advance through the emotional turbulence feeding it, and Naruto had become exquisitely attuned to such currents. He turned aside a cleaver edge that would have sheared his arm away, stepped inside a spear thrust that blurred the air, caught Tessin's wrist, and for one instant let malice resonance surge outward. Tessin roared, not in pain, in exhilaration. The spirit staggered backward, crimson markings flaring as Naruto's touch fed on the wrath, animating him, and mirrored it back sharpened. The hole's pillars blackened. Outside, the pine trees nearest the shrine shed all their needles at once. Then Mume was behind him. Naruto knew only because the air where memory should have been folded strangely. A thin black blade passed for his throat without warning. He bent, the blade missed by a hair. Even as he moved, the last second tried to vanish from his mind. He almost lost the fact of the attack entirely. Almost turned the wrong way. Almost forgot there had been someone there. His hand snapped out and seized empty sleeve. Mume's form flickered. For a heartbeat, Naruto saw them clearly not a body, but a cluster of absences stitched together by intent. A living omission. Then Komai lifted one finger. The ruined hall aged. Wood that had survived decades in neglect suddenly attempted to survive centuries in a breath. Beams warped, split, collapsed downward. Stone lost cohesion and turned brittle. The floor beneath Naruto's feet crumbled into dust. Time itself did not accelerate. Rather, endurance was revoked. Naruto dropped through the failing structure into the shrine's undercroft. Darkness engulfed him. The basement beneath the hole was older than the temple above it, a chamber carved directly into the mountain where ancient offerings had once been stored. Clay jars lay shattered across the dirt floor. Prayer tablets hung in long, rotted bundles from the walls. The air smelled of old incense, mold, and now the cold iron tang of the seam opening wider above. Naruto landed lightly. Before he could straighten, the chamber changed. It was no longer a cellar. He was standing in his childhood apartment, the orange walls, the small bed, the milk spoiled in the fridge, the lonely silence so complete it had once become a second heartbeat. Naruto stared without moving as memory took shape around him with perfect detail. Yurei no Hana stepped from the hallway, only now she wore Iruka's face, not exactly. Something inhuman still lingered at the edges, enough to keep the image from becoming parody. But the wound she was touching was clear. She looked at him with sorrow so familiar it might once have broken him. "Naruto," she said in Iruka's voice, "if you had just endured a little longer." The room exploded, not outward, inward. Every object in it imploded into black petals and vanished. Yurei no Hana stood unchanged amid the ruin, hollow eyes fixed on him. Naruto lowered his hand. "I know what grief sounds like," he said. Her expression did not alter, yet something like approval moved through the room. "That is why it cannot own you." The wall behind him split. Kurohane descended from the crack like a spider crossing from one dark place to another. Its claws brushed Naruto's shoulder, and instantly a chill tore through him as the spirit began to drink not blood, not chakra, but vitality in a purer sense. Animation. Motion. The principle that said a body should continue. Naruto felt the drain. For an instant, his limbs became heavy. Then the hunger inside him answered. Not with panic, with instinct. He turned and placed his palm against Kurohane's chest. The bird-like spirit jerked violently, its vertical mouth opened in silent shock as Naruto's malice resonance latched onto the ancient starvation that defined it. Kurohane fed by consuming life. Naruto fed by consuming the negative force surrounding life. The contact created a loop, each trying to metabolize the other. Cracks of black gold light raced across Kurohane's mask. Then Naruto released it. Kurohane sprang backward to the far wall, folding in on itself like a cloak full of razors. It hissed once, low and thoughtful. "You do not reject hunger," it said. "No." The word surprised even Naruto with how true it felt. Above them, the shrine's remaining roof collapsed fully, opening the chamber to a circle of storm-dark sky. Rain poured down through the hole in silver lines. All 5 sovereign spirits gathered at the edges of the undercroft, surrounding him in ruined stone and shadow. The test had ended. Naruto understood this because the pressure in the room changed. No longer sharpened toward violence, rebalanced toward judgment, Tessen rolled his shoulders, grinning like a soldier who had finally found a war worth fighting. "He doesn't beg," the wrath spirit said. "That helps." Kurohane tilted its head. "He also does not pretend hunger is shameful. Better." Mumei's voice came from a place the ear couldn't track. "He notices absence. Most living things cannot." Komai folded dust, shedding sleeves into stillness. More importantly, he understands structure. He does not reach immediately for destruction. Last, Yurei no Hana stepped to the center of the ring. Rain fell through her body and came out darker. "You were broken by expectation," she said to Naruto. "Not merely by pain. That makes you dangerous in a way rage alone never could." Naruto met her hollow gaze. "I didn't ask for worship." Tessen barked a laugh. "Good." Komai inclined his head faintly. "Neither do we offer it." The ruined chamber held silence a moment longer. Then, in one synchronized motion so old it must once have belonged to courts buried by history, the 5 dark entities bowed. Not deeply, not submissively, but with unmistakable acknowledgement. "We recognize you," Yurei no Hana said. "Not master," Komai added. "Not jailer," Mumei whispered. "Not prey," hissed Kurohane. Tessen's grin sharpened. "Center." The word hit the chamber like a bell. Something in the seam behind them locked into place. Naruto stood in the rain, black crystals spreading across the dirt around his feet, and for the first time since the valley he felt a shape forming around his existence. Not destiny, that thread had been severed and consumed. This was different, chosen, built, a court. He looked at each of them in turn. 5 catastrophes wearing names, 5 powers ancient enough to devastate nations if turned loose without order. The old Naruto would have talked about friendship, about trust, about making them believe in him. He found that he had no interest in lying to them or himself in that way. "If you stand with me," he said, "it won't be because I chain you." The rain quieted. Even the mountain wind seemed to pause. Yurei no Hana's robes shifted like mourning banners. Komai went perfectly still. Tessen's grin faded into something almost serious. Mume became harder to remember with every second of silence. Kurohane folded its claws neatly. Naruto continued, "You don't serve because I'm kind, or because I promise a better world in the way humans usually mean it." He glanced upward through the broken roof at the dim sky above the mountain. "You serve because the world that exists is rotten all the way down, and I'm going to stop pretending otherwise." Black gold light flared faintly in his eyes. "No false loyalty," he said. "No games, no worship. No sentimental betrayal disguised as mercy. If you follow me, it's because you want the world remade. If you don't, leave now." For several heartbeats nothing moved. Then Komai, old ruin in courtly robes, smiled for the first time. It was a small, terrible thing. "A meritocracy of malice," he murmured. "How very refreshing." Yurei no Hana placed one pale hand over her chest. "I accept." Tessen drove the butt of his changing weapon into the earth hard enough to split stone. "I'm in." Mume said nothing, but the darkness near Naruto's left side deepened in a way that felt like a scent. Kurohane bowed again, elegant and hungry. "Where life breeds fear, I will feed your rise." Naruto let the silence settle after that, not because he was uncertain, because something in him enjoyed the weight of being listened to. Kurama's presence stirred again inside him, old and vast and unreadable. "You sound different." Naruto did not answer immediately. He looked at the shattered shrine, the dead pines beyond it, the rain turning black wherever it touched the spreading crystal at his feet. He thought of Konoha, of the Leaf's gates at dawn, of people waking inside its walls secure in the assumption that the future would still resemble the past. Then he answered inwardly, "I am." Kurama was quiet for a long while. Then, not without irony, the fox said, "Good." Naruto stepped toward the center of the undercroft, where the oldest altar stone still jutted from the earth. He placed his hand upon it. "Then hear me." The mountain listened. The valley listened. The seam between worlds widened just enough that whispers beyond it hushed to catch his words. "I won't build an army that burns and scatters like every other shinobi force." Naruto's voice was calm, but it carried farther than sound should. "This world destroys itself well enough already. What I'm building is something worse for it." Tessen chuckled. Yurei no Hana did not. Naruto looked up. "We begin with structure." At that, Komai's closed eyes seemed almost to open. Naruto pointed first to him. Komai, the ruined spirit, bowed. "You see foundations, weak points. The place's systems are already collapsing and just haven't admitted it yet." Naruto's gaze sharpened. "You're my strategist. You map the fault lines: political, spiritual, military, psychological. I want to know where every village is already dying from inside." "As you wish," Komai said. "Most empires are generous enough to sabotage themselves." Naruto turned to Yurei no Hana. "You don't kill first. You make people look at what they buried until they break under the weight of it." A faint smile touched her knot face. "Grief is the oldest blade." "Your psychological warfare," Naruto said. "Dreams, hauntings, hallucinations, cities that stop trusting their own memories, armies that begin mourning before they lose." She bowed her head in acceptance. "Next, Tessen." The wrath spirit straightened eagerly. Naruto's eyes narrowed with something like cold amusement. "You're what I send when fear needs a body." Tessen's grin returned in full. "Finally." "You don't just kill," Naruto said. "You ignite what's already waiting in people, rage between allies, old resentment in command chains, pride that would rather self-destruct than kneel." Tessen slammed his weapon into his shoulder. "That I can do!" Naruto looked to the half-forgotten shape at the chamber's edge. Mume, the nameless one, remained almost imperceptible. "You go where identity matters most," Naruto said. "Records, messengers, commanders, people holding systems together because others remember who they are." His expression cooled further. "Erase the right name and a nation starts to bleed." Mume inclined their veiled head. The world is held together by memory more often than stone. Last, he faced Kurohane. The hunger spirit watched him with needle teeth hidden. You keep me fed. Kurohane's claws clicked once, delighted. You drain what resists, battlefield vitality, exhaustion, panic, the life that spills off dying structures. Naruto's voice dropped. And you convert all of it into malice resonance? Nothing wasted. Efficient, Kurohane whispered. Naruto let his hand remain on the altar. The old stone beneath his palm began to darken, veins of black crystal spreading through it like roots. And me, he said. None of them answered, because they knew. Because the center of a court does not name itself to feel real. Naruto raised his head and finished. I move last. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled over the mountain with the solemnity of a verdict. I don't need to conquer everything at once. I need the world to feel me coming before it sees me. I need villages sleeping badly, alliances cracking, commanders misjudging each other, civilians waking with grief they can't explain. I want the idea of me to arrive before I do. Yurei no Hana's hollow gaze brightened. A haunting before a coronation, Naruto almost smiled. Yes. Outside, the dead pines bowed in the wind as if to some passing ruler. Komai folded his sleeves. And where will your court reside? One shrine cannot contain what is growing around you. Naruto looked around the undercroft. He considered the mountain, the ruined temple, the thinness of the seam here. This place had served its purpose. It had recognized him, tested him, given form to what could otherwise have remained wandering hunger. But Komai was right. A king without a seat was still a phenomenon, not an order. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment. He reached outward with senses no shinobi teacher had ever prepared him for. Past trees, past stone, past the mountain's spine. He felt the emotions threaded through miles of land, fear in villages, bitterness in roads between countries, grief at fresh graves, exhaustion in border outposts. Beneath it, all ran old lines of damage, spiritual scars, where history had hurt the earth badly enough that it remembered. One of those scars pulsed brighter than the rest, southwest, close enough to fire country to matter, old enough to be forgotten, important enough to reclaim. Naruto opened his eyes. There's a place, he said, an abandoned fortress temple on the border between old battlegrounds. Everyone fought around it so long they stopped seeing it. Too cursed for civilians, too meaningless for shinobi. Perfect. Komai nodded once, already understanding the value. A throne built from neglect, appropriate. Tessen rolled his neck. And after that, Naruto looked past them, as if the walls no longer blocked his sight. After that, he said, we start with the leaf. For the first time since his emergence from the Valley of the End, a genuine silence fell over the court. It was not surprise that stilled them, it was anticipation. Yurei no Hana drifted closer. You will not destroy it immediately? No. Konoha rose in his mind, its roofs, its walls, the Hokage monument carved into stone like an argument with time. He saw ramen steam, training posts, empty swings, academy hallways, mission desks, hospital lights. Affection did not vanish from those images. That was the uncomfortable truth. He still knew what they meant, still felt the contour of old attachment, but attachment was no longer command. I don't want ashes, Naruto said softly. Ashes end too quickly. Kurohane's mouth parted with a thin smile. You want conversion? Naruto looked at him. Yes, the word echoed. Mume shifted in the darkness. Then Konoha must first become uncertain of itself. It will, Naruto said. Komai stepped forward, dust trickling from the hems of his robes. The leaf's strength is not only military, it is narrative. It believes itself righteous. It teaches its people to interpret sacrifice as virtue and exploitation as duty. To take such a village, one must first damage the story it tells about itself. Naruto's eyes burned faintly gold-black. Then we start there. Yurei no Hana lifted her hand, and in the rain between her fingers appeared the faint illusion of Konoha's skyline beneath a darkening sky. I can make them dream of losses they have not yet admitted. Yume's voice emerged like a thought one forgets while having it. I can remove small things first. A clerk, A password, a name in a ledger, nothing dramatic. Let paranoia do the rest, Tessin laughed under his breath. And when they start turning on each other, I'll be nearby. Kurohane folded wing-like robes around himself. Their fear will nourish him before he ever enters the gate. Naruto listened. This was different from planning missions with Team 7 or arguing strategy with allies. Those had always involved ideals somewhere beneath the tactics, some shared assumption that victory protected life. This discussion had no such sentimental skeleton. It was brutally clean. Everyone in the room knew what they were, what they offered, and what result they sought. He found the clarity intoxicating. "Good," he said. One word, and the undercroft vibrated. The altar stone finally cracked apart beneath his palm, unable to contain the force settling through it. Black crystal spread through the chamber walls, up the broken pillars, through the mountain's roots. Outside, every surviving bell in the ruined shrine began to ring without wind. Naruto drew his hand back and looked at the 5 before him. Then hear the law of this court. All motion ceased. No lying about loyalty, no betrayal disguised as compassion, no pity where honesty is required. His gaze passed from one sovereign to the next. "If one of you no longer believes in what we're building, say it before you act on it." Tessin snorted. "That's almost noble." Naruto ignored the comment. "You do not feed on each other. You do not undermine each other for amusement. Power struggles are for courts made of insecure men. Ours is not." Komai bowed. Sensible, Naruto's expression darkened. "And when we move against the world, we do it with purpose, not random slaughter, not wasted terror. Every act should leave a structure weaker than it was before." That seemed to please all of them for different reasons. Yurei no Hana because it meant suffering would be curated, not squandered. Komai because it implied design. Mume because precision was its own kind of reverence. Kurohane because prolonged fear fed better than simple death. Tessin because even wrath enjoyed a battlefield chosen well. Naruto looked up through the broken roof one last time. Dawn should have been coming. Instead, the sky remained an hour darker than it ought to be. Clouds rotated slowly overhead in a bruised spiral. Reality was beginning to answer him. Kurama's voice reached him again, quieter this time. "You feel it now, don't you?" Naruto did. When he had first risen from the river, he was a wound learning to move. A singular calamity. Dangerous but directionless. Now direction had found him, court, purpose. Method, not merely a cursed thing, a sovereign thing. He stepped away from the broken altar and turned toward the mountain path leading out of the shrine. The others moved with him naturally, forming no rigid formation, and yet arranging themselves in a loose orbit around his pace. Already the court was teaching itself its own geometry. At the ruined gate, Naruto paused. He looked back once at the collapsed temple. This place had been sacred to something once, some older protection, some human idea that prayer could bargain with disaster. Now it belonged to a different era. "Leave it standing," Naruto said. Tessin looked disappointed. "Why?" Naruto's eyes slid across the leaning torii, the dead courtyard, the blackening fog. "Because people should find it later," he said, "and understand that something came here before it came for them." A grin spread across Tessin's face. Komai murmured, almost approvingly, "Symbolism remains useful, even after one has outgrown hope." Then they left the mountain. As they descended through the dead pines, animals fled in widening circles. Streams they crossed darkened. Old burial markers split open from internal frost. Villages miles away would wake uneasy without knowing why. Some would dream of faceless kings. Some would forget names that mattered. Some would simply stand at windows before dawn with inexplicable grief in their throats. And far to the east, in Konoha, people who had not yet heard what happened at the Valley of the End would begin their day under a sky just slightly dimmer than memory insisted it should be. Naruto did not look back again. Ahead of him lay a fortress temple reclaimed from neglect, a court seat waiting in ruin, and beyond that the Leaf Village not to be burned, not yet, but to be haunted until it no longer trusted the sunlight that touched its walls. At his side moved grief, ruin, wrath, erasure, and hunger. Above them, the world darkened by increments too subtle for ordinary eyes. And in that slow, terrible dimming, the first truth of the new age took shape. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer alone. He had become the kind of center loneliness creates when it finally stops asking to be loved. He had a court now, and courts, unlike heroes, are not built to save worlds. They are built to rule the ruins left after illusions fail. Chapter 3, The long shadow over Konoha. Konoha did not notice the haunting begin. That was the first proof it was working. If a village sees a monster at its gates, it knows what shape its fear should take. Bells ring. Shinobi gather. Orders are barked across rooftops. Civilians pull children indoors and bar shutters. Panic becomes visible, and visible panic can be managed, directed, turned into courage if the right people stand in the right places and say the right words. But if a village wakes slightly wrong, if its people begin the day with a sense of absence they cannot name, if an academy teacher pauses mid-lesson because he is certain he has forgotten an important student even while the attendance sheet insists otherwise, then the fear has no edge to push against. It seeps. And seepage, Komai had observed on the second night of planning, was how structures died without understanding they were collapsing. So Naruto did not march. He did not summon storms over the walls or let Tessen loose in the market streets. He did not sit on the Hokage monument in full view of the village and challenge Konoha to face him. That would have been theatrical. Honest in one sense, perhaps, but strategically wasteful. The Leaf had been built by generations of people who knew how to respond to visible threats. It had drills, command chains, sensors, ambush squads, seal barriers, legends it told itself about perseverance. What it did not know how to fight was uncertainty, so uncertainty came first. The first person to notice something wrong was not a shinobi. It was an old records clerk named Minabu who had spent 33 years in the administrative wing copying mission assignments, transcribing council minutes, and maintaining personnel archives that very few people appreciated until something in them went missing. He was the sort of man Konoha produced quietly and relied upon without ceremony. Precise, forgettable, loyal in a way that required no speeches. On a Monday morning just before sunrise, Minabu unlocked Archive Room 3 and found a blank shelf. Not empty, blank, the wood was there. Dust lay across it in a perfectly ordinary coat, but the labels fixed to the front edge had no ink, and the stack of binders that should have occupied the center section mission rosters from roughly 6 years prior seemed not to have existed. There was no evidence of theft, no broken lock, no displaced dust. Even the indentation where their weight should have rested on the timber was absent. Minabu stood there a long while. He rubbed his eyes, checked the room number twice, recounted the shelf positions under his breath. Then a peculiar unease crawled over him, not panic. Something smaller and more corrosive. The feeling of reaching for a word and finding only static where memory should be. He could not remember what records belonged on that shelf. He only knew something had. By midday, he had mentioned it to 2 other clerks, who both agreed he seemed tired and should go home early. By evening, one of those clerks had forgotten the conversation happened at all. Mume had made no dramatic move. That was precisely the point. 3 days later, a Jonin instructor arriving for a debrief stood in the Hokage Tower hallway and stared at a framed photograph on the wall for nearly a full minute. It was a team photo. The instructor knew this because Team 7's old picture had hung there for years among other post-mission commemorations. Kakashi in the back. Sakura young and impatient on one side. Sasuke tense and guarded on the other, and in the middle he frowned. There should have been someone in the middle. He knew it with irrational certainty. The composition was wrong without that fact. The space between Sakura and Sasuke felt too wide, the emotional geometry of the image off balance, but the photograph itself showed only the 2 genin and their teacher. No blur, no tear, no sign of removal. Just an empty patch of background where the mind insisted a bright shape ought to have been. The Jonin stared until discomfort turned to embarrassment. He moved on without mentioning it. That evening he dreamed of orange, nothing else. Just the color. Warm, ridiculous, impossible to hold. He woke with tears on his face, and no reason for them. Yurei no Hana entered the village through sleep. She did not cross the wall's invisible form or trigger any barrier seals, because grief did not move like a body. It moved like weather. She stood at the edge of Konoha one dusk with her long hair drifting in wind no one else felt, and she exhaled. That was enough. The first dreams were minor. A mother dreamed her dead brother sat at the breakfast table and asked why she no longer spoke his name. A genin dreamed of failing an exam he had already passed years before, only to wake with the sharp conviction that his sensei had expected disappointment all along. A retired shinobi dreamed of the Third War and spent the next morning staring at his own hands because he could not remember which of the faces in the dream belonged to comrades and which to enemies. On the fourth night, the dreams synchronized, not completely. Yurei no Hana was too elegant for blunt repetition, but patterns emerged. Water where it should not be. A valley under thunder. A voice calling from very far away and very close at once. Civilians began waking before dawn with the sensation that someone beloved had gone missing, though no one in their family was gone. Market conversations stuttered. People lingered slightly longer beside memorial stones. Children clung to parents without understanding why. The village's emotional atmosphere changed before anyone admitted it. Konoha had always prided itself on a kind of practical optimism. Even grief here wore purpose. People mourned and then returned to training, to duty, to small civic rituals built to prove the will of fire was something stronger than pain. Now the fire felt dampened. Laughter came slower. Patrol reports grew clipped and irritable. Medical shinobi snapped at one another in the hospital for reasons too small to justify the bitterness behind them. Rumors began not with information but with tone. Something's off. Feels like bad weather. Did someone die? No, not die. Just what? No one could say. That absence became its own contagion. Komai watched the village from an abandoned watchpoint in the forest east of Konoha and wrote nothing down. He did not need to. Decay was a language he read directly in posture, timing, institutional rhythm. From his vantage, he tracked patrol rotations, messenger delays, the subtle increase in barrier checks, the frequency with which the Hawkage Tower lit its upper windows after midnight. Ruin did not begin with walls falling. It began with systems using more effort to produce less certainty. He reported to Naruto each evening in the reclaimed fortress temple that now served as the court seat. The place had once belonged to no country clearly enough to claim. It stood on a plateau between old conflict lines, built in an era when warrior monks and daimyo guard units still occasionally blurred into one another. The outer walls had cracked. Half the prayer towers had collapsed. The central hall had no roof, leaving the blackened throne platform exposed to sky. Beneath it, catacombs honeycombed the stone foundations with chambers full of broken idols and forgotten votive plaques. Naruto had chosen it because the world had already stopped believing it mattered. Now it mattered more each day. The plateau around it had gone dark green to near black. Water in the cistern reflected stars that were not always in the sky above. Travelers avoided the region instinctively. Birds nested elsewhere. At dusk, whispers moved through the colonnades in voices too soft to parse. At the center of the hall, where some abbot or warlord had once kept ceremonial audience, a new seat had been raised not by laborers, but by the slow crystallization of Naruto's presence, a throne of black stone and gold-veined shadow growing upward from the cracked floor like a decision made by the earth itself. Naruto did not always sit on it. That, Komai noted, made it more effective. When the court assembled, the throne was not furniture. It was implication. Now he stood below it while Naruto listened. The first stage is complete, Komai said, sleeves folded, dust sifting from their hems. Administrative integrity is beginning to fray, not catastrophically, better than that. Quietly, Naruto sat one step below the full height of the throne, elbow on one knee, chin resting lightly against curled fingers. He wore no crown, no armor. The remnants of his shinobi clothes had long since changed with him, still resembling black and darkened orange at a glance, but now threaded with moving lines of shadow like seals that refused to hold still. His whisker marks had deepened further into dark, elegant cuts across his cheeks. His eyes remained that impossible void gold, luminous only at the edges. "How far?" he asked. Komai inclined his head. "Records are becoming unreliable in pockets. Patterns of absence are small enough to rationalize individually, large enough to accumulate institutionally. Mission archives, team photographs, a handful of hospital logs. Mume has been delicate." "Good," Naruto said, from the left side of the hall, where moonlight should have touched empty air but instead pooled around a shape memory struggled to hold. Mume spoke. "Delicacy is required. Remove too much, and humans call it attack. Remove only enough to make them distrust themselves, and they do the damage for you." Tessin lounged against a cracked pillar with his mutable weapon across his shoulders, looking profoundly dissatisfied. "You're all having fun with paperwork and bad dreams," he said. "When do I get to tear somebody in half?" Yurei no Hana, seated on the broken remains of an incense altar, glanced toward him with mild contempt. "When their own rage becomes useful," she said. "Not before." Kurohane clicked his claws together softly from where he perched on a collapsed beam overhead. "The village is beginning to feed him already," the hunger spirit murmured. "Fear without outlet lingers. It enriches." Naruto had felt that himself. Every night since the haunting began, malice resonance drifted toward him from Konoha in slow, invisible currents. It was not as strong as battlefield hatred, not yet, but it was steadier. A village-wide undercurrent of unease, self-doubt, mourning without object. He absorbed it not greedily, but continuously, the way a deep lake accepts rainfall. And with each evening the range of his perception widened. He could now sense not merely strong emotions, but the structures around them, neighborhoods where anxiety clustered, buildings where denial held longer than it should, individual minds flickering brighter when old affection or resentment made them vulnerable. Konoha was beginning to know him without seeing him. That was exactly what he wanted. "Have they spoken my name?" he asked. Yurei no Hana smiled faintly. "Some dream it," she said. "Few wake with it intact." Naruto absorbed that in silence. There was satisfaction in it, yes, but not simple vanity. He remembered too well what it had meant to spend a life wanting acknowledgement as a kind of oxygen. This was not that same need wearing darker clothes. This was function, identity as pressure. If his presence entered the village first as rumor, memory, grief, then by the time his body crossed the gate, resistance would already be compromised by familiarity. He rose from the throne step. The court stilled automatically. "Then it's time to tighten the circle," he said. Tessin straightened, interested at once. Naruto looked to Yurei no Hana. "Go deeper. I want the dreams to feel personal now, not random sadness, targeted absences." Her pale, drowned eyes brightened. "Specific names." Naruto paused. He knew which names mattered. Kakashi, Sakura, Uruka. Tsunade, though he suspected distance and sheer force of will would make her harder to reach. Others, too. Men and women who had once held some piece of him and assumed that meant the whole would remain recoverable. He found no pleasure in what came next. That did not stop him. "Yes," he said. "Start with those who loved me enough to weaken themselves with certainty." Yurei no Hana bowed her head. Naruto turned to Mume. "Escalate around the tower, the archives, and the academy. Not enough to expose yourself, enough to make command structure start questioning its own continuity." Mume's outline blurred, then sharpened. "Understood." "Komai," Naruto said. "When they begin compensating, I want to know how. Fear makes institutions reveal what they actually value." "Of course," said Ruin. Finally, Naruto looked at Tessin. The wrath spirit grinned before the order came. "Not yet," Naruto said, and the grin faltered. Then Naruto's eyes cooled further. but soon start stirring their edges, patrol skirmishes, anonymous provocations, small incidents that make tempers rise. I want discipline strained, not shattered. Tessen's grin returned, sharper than before. Now you're talking. Kurohane lowered his beaked mask. And me! Naruto looked toward the east, toward the village hidden beyond miles of dark forest. Stay near the hospital and the memorial districts, he said. Feed where despair naturally pools. Quietly, we're not starving them yet. We're seasoning them. Kurohane shivered with delight. The court dispersed into shadow and distance. Naruto remained standing in the roofless hall alone for a time, looking east as night turned thinner toward dawn. Kurama stirred within him. You still separate them into categories in your mind. Naruto did not pretend confusion. What do you mean, the village, the people in it? Some part of you still thinks in terms of which of them matter more. The accusation was not sharp, merely observant. Naruto watched a line of bats cross the paling sky. They do matter more. Does that trouble you? He considered. It should have, perhaps. Once, Naruto would have believed a ruler's justice had to be equal to remain moral, but morality felt like a garment tailored for another body now. What remained was accuracy. Kakashi mattered differently than a clerk, Uruka differently than a merchant, Sakura differently than a nameless guard on the wall. That was not contradiction, it was truth. No, he said at last. Kurama was silent. Then, faintly amused, the fox replied, good. Konoha's first formal response did not begin with alarms. It began with discussion. Tsunade returned from a diplomatic inspection route to find her village subdued in ways no incident report captured cleanly. The mission board backlog had increased despite no corresponding rise in assignments. 2 Anbu captains had independently requested barrier inspections based on persistent sensor inconsistencies they could not reproduce under scrutiny. A junior archivist had burst into tears over a file she insisted had been altered, though no evidence supported the claim. Civilians were reporting sleep disturbances across 3 districts. Most troublingly, Kakashi Hatake had gone quiet. That more than anything made Tsunade take the situation seriously. Kakashi was not a man given to dramatics. Detached, late, occasionally insufferable, yes. But when he stopped hiding behind understatement and simply looked tired, it usually meant he had seen something unpleasantly real. They met in the Hokage's office near midnight. Shizune stood to one side with reports in hand. Anbu masked the roof. The windows were shut against a wind that did not warrant it. Tsunade tossed a stack of papers onto her desk. I want an answer that isn't everyone stressed, she said. Kakashi stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, visible eye lowered toward a personnel report he had already read twice. I don't have a clean one, he said. Start dirty. He was silent a beat too long then. It feels like the village is forgetting around something. Shizune frowned. Tsunade's expression hardened, not because the phrasing sounded ridiculous, but because he believed it. Define around, she said. Kakashi held up the report. Missing archival continuity. Inconsistent team records, civilians describing grief responses without identifiable causes, identical motifs in dreams across districts, sensors reporting fluctuations that resemble neither genjutsu nor barrier breach. He finally looked up. And a growing number of people who seem certain they're not remembering someone or something important, but can't pin down what. The room held stillness. Tsunade's fingers drummed once against the desk, hard enough to dent wood. You think this is hostile action? Yes. From whom? Kakashi's visible eyes shifted away. That was answer enough. Tsunade exhaled through her nose. We haven't confirmed Naruto is alive. No, Kakashi said softly. We haven't. But both of them were thinking it, not because evidence demanded it plainly, because absence had a shape. And this one hurt in a way too familiar to ignore. Tsunade made decisions quickly after that. Barrier teams doubled. Anbu patrols widened. The intelligence division was authorized to investigate non-standard genjutsu or spiritual interference. Civilian sleep disturbance reports were quietly redirected through medical channels to avoid panic. Mission traffic in and out of the village was tightened. No announcement was made. Publicly, nothing had happened. Privately, the village entered a defensive crouch. Komai smiled when he learned of it. "Excellent," he said. "They've begun to spend trust." Iruka Umino dreamed of the swing. Not the one in the academy yard as it truly was, but a version of it suspended over black water beneath a sky with no stars. It moved gently, back and forth, and every time it came toward him there was a child sitting on it laughing, shouting, waving, but when it swung back the seat was empty. The dream repeated until dawn. When Iruka woke, his pillow was damp and his chest ached with such fierce, unplaceable tenderness that he had to sit on the edge of the bed for several minutes before he could stand. He went to work anyway. The academy was familiar enough to steady him at first. Children argued in hallways. Instructors bickered over training schedules. Paperwork stacked itself into the usual gentle tyranny on his desk. He held onto routine the way men on rough seas hold onto railings. Then a student in his afternoon class asked a harmless question. "Sensei," the child said, "was there ever a student who painted the Hokage monument orange?" The room laughed. Iruka did not. Something in him stopped. He stared at the child, then at the class around him, then at the window where sunlight lay warm across the sill. A memory pushed up from somewhere he had not realized was blocked. Paint-stained fingers, bright defiant eyes, a grin too big for consequences. Naruto, the name hit him like a blow to the lungs. Not forgotten fully, never that. But occluded, smudged, made harder to hold by days of subtle erasure and dream haunting until recollection itself felt like resisting water pressure. Now that he remembered, the forgetting horrified him. The class went quiet. "Iruka-sensei," he inhaled sharply. "Class dismissed early," he said. The children scattered in grateful confusion. Iruka remained standing alone at the front of the room, one hand braced against the desk, heart pounding. Naruto? Alive? Dead? Somewhere in between? The village's unease snapped suddenly into focus around that name, and Iruka felt both immense relief and immediate dread. If this was Naruto, then the pain haunting Konoha was not random. It was personal, and if it was personal, then perhaps it could be reached. That hope was exactly what Yurei no Hana had wanted. By nightfall, Iruka had volunteered himself for the next stage without knowing it. Naruto stood outside the walls on the seventh dawn. Mist clung low to the forest floor. The eastern sky was pale but sickly, as if morning had passed through dirty glass before reaching the world. Konoha's main gate rose ahead, sturdy and familiar, its heavy doors open to admit the first outbound merchants and patrol rotations. He had not entered the village in body since the valley. Now he came alone. That mattered. Tessen and Kurohane remained hidden in the woods. Yurei no Hana watched from the rooftops where sorrow gathered best. Mume moved somewhere nearer the tower. Komai, as always, had arranged the fault lines and then stepped back to observe how weight would break them. Naruto walked toward the gate with no haste. Each step darkened the dust slightly after it left his foot. Birds on the walls fell silent one by one. The two Chunin manning the entry post stiffened before they consciously noticed why. Their eyes tracked toward him with the confused instinct people have when they feel danger before recognition. Then recognition came. One of them inhaled sharply enough to choke on it. "En Naruto!" The name rang across the gateyard. The second guard's hand flew toward a weapon, but uncertainty slowed him. This was the problem Komai had predicted. If Naruto had arrived roaring, cloaked in monstrous chakra, procedures would have taken over. Instead, he arrived looking almost like himself, merely emptied of warmth and filled with something older. He wore no headband now. That somehow made him more frightening. Naruto looked from one guard to the other. He knew them both by sight. He had stood these gates himself on certain rotations, complaining about boring shifts and dreaming aloud about greater things. "I'm here to see the village," he said. The first guard's face had gone white. Behind them, a passing civilian wagon slowed, then halted entirely. People began noticing. Heads turned. A murmur spread. The second guard found enough training to bark. "Stop where you are," Naruto did, not obediently. Merely because he had chosen to, one of the guards triggered the alarm seal. Its light flared red across the gatehouse. In the same instant, the temperature dropped, not from ice, from presence. Naruto's reality decay unfurled subtly around him, enough to make the wood beams overhead creak, and the iron bands on the gate frost over with thin black patterns. Civilians backed away in mounting confusion. Somewhere a child started crying. Naruto stood in the center of it, all very still. The village came to meet him. They arrived in layers. First Chunin and Jonin from nearby patrol sectors, landing on walls and rooftops with weapons drawn but hesitation in their posture. Then Anbu, masks unreadable, surrounding angles of approach. Then Sakura, breathless and pale, leaping to the gate roof and freezing at the sight of him. Then Kakashi, appearing with the quiet efficiency of someone who had suspected this exact morning and hated being right. Iruka came on foot. He pushed through gathering shinobi and civilians with no attention to hierarchy. Eyes locked on Naruto's face. For a long moment nobody spoke. It was Sakura who broke first. "Naruto?" Her voice cracked on the second syllable. He looked up at her. The pain in her expression was immediate, unguarded, and so fiercely human that for the briefest flicker something shifted behind his eyes. Not surrender, not regret, recognition sharp enough to hurt. "Hello, Sakura." She dropped from the roof to the ground in front of the gate, hands trembling. "What happened to you?" Naruto's gaze moved past her to Kakashi. The copy ninja stood one pace ahead of the other Jonin, sharing an uncovered, visible eye hard and far too sad. "You tell me," Naruto said quietly. Kakashi did not answer, perhaps because there were too many true possibilities. Then Iruka reached the front. He stopped only a few paces away, breathing hard, not from exertion but from the effort of holding himself together. Naruto looked at him. For all the other bonds in his life, Iruka belonged to a category none of them did. Not rival, not teammate, not mentor in the conventional shinobi sense. Iruka had been the first adult to see a child where others saw an inconvenience or a weapon, the first to feed him recognition without demanding symbolism in return. That made this harder. It also made it necessary. Iruka swallowed once. "Naruto?" he said, and his voice shook. "Come back." The village held its breath. Naruto was silent. Iruka took one step closer. "Whatever this is, whatever happened out there, we can know," Naruto said. The word was not loud. It still cut through everything. Iruka stopped. Naruto's expression remained calm, but the air around him warped slightly, and several nearby shinobi winced as buried memories pressed closer to the surface of consciousness. Funeral pyres, empty apartments, blood on exam papers, invisible wounds suddenly difficult to keep buried. "You're going to say we can help," Naruto said. "That we can fix it, that if I come inside and let the village hold the story together, then something of me can still be restored." Iruka's eyes shone, because it can. A faint sadness passed through Naruto's face. "There," he said softly. "That's the cage." Iruka flinched. "You were kind to me," Naruto continued, and now everyone listening felt the awful sincerity in it. "You gave me something real when almost no one else did, but even you needed me to become something for the village. Something bright enough to justify the pain it put into me." "That isn't true." "It is." Naruto stepped forward. Anbu tensed. Kakashi raised one hand to halt them. The gesture cost him. Naruto stopped again, only a pace closer. "Iruka," he said, and the old affection in the name made the gathered silence almost unbearable. "You taught me that acknowledgement could save a person, but you also taught me to be grateful for surviving what should never have been asked of me." Iruka stared. Tears spilled before he could stop them. "I loved you," he said. Naruto's gaze lowered fractionally. "I know." The answer was gentle. That made Sakura break. "Then why are you doing this?" she demanded, voice cracking into anger because grief alone could not hold her upright. "Why are you hurting everyone?" Naruto turned to her. "Because everyone was already hurt," he said. "I just stopped helping you lie about it." The words landed like a frost across the gateyard. Sakura's face twisted. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed. Around them, shinobi shifted uneasily as if the statement had named a truth too blunt for comfort. Kakashi stepped forward at last. "That's enough." Naruto looked at him, and something in the morning darkened. For several heartbeats neither moved, teacher and student, failure and possibility. The man who had tried to turn broken children into a functioning team, and the boy who had once chased connection so fiercely he mistook persistence for salvation. "You should leave," Kakashi said. It was not an order. It was an exhausted plea wrapped in shinobi tone. Naruto's mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but into recognition. "You already know I won't." Kakashi's shoulders settled. The sadness went out of his face and left only decision. "Then I stop you here." The first exchange lasted less than a second. Kakashi vanished in a flicker step, lightning already cracking into his palm. Chidori's scream split the air, and the gathered shinobi scattered back as the attack came in not from the front, but the blind angle, exactly where Kakashi had ended harder fights than this. Naruto turned without haste. His hand rose. The Chidori hit his palm. Lightning detonated outward in white-blue arcs, shattering stone, scorching the gate frame, blinding half the yard for a moment, but Naruto did not move. Black gold distortion wrapped his fingers, consuming the attack's edge. He could feel the structure of it, the discipline, the practiced grief buried beneath Kakashi's precision. This was not Sasuke's metaphysical severing strike. This was a teacher trying to do the necessary thing. Naruto closed his hand. The Chidori went out. Gasps broke across the wall. Kakashi twisted instantly into a kick aimed at Naruto's ribs. Naruto took it on one forearm and slid backward only a fraction, his sandals carving black lines through the dust. Kakashi followed with relentless efficiency: kunai, feint, low sweep, clone split, wire loop, fire style from an Anbu flank coordinated perfectly into his opening. Naruto moved through it all like a man walking through remembered weather. He no longer fought with noise. That was perhaps the most frightening change to those who knew him. No shouted challenges, no grin before impact, no exuberant improvisation, only economy. He broke the wire with a touch that aged steel into snapping rust. He let the fire style split around him as the air bent wrong at his shoulders. He seized a shadow clone by the throat, and it dissolved not into smoke, but into a burst of dark petals as Yurei no Hana's influence tainted even the replication. Kakashi's Sharingan spun. "Don't look at his eyes." Someone shouted, too late. A Chunin on the wall met Naruto's gaze for a fraction of a second and dropped his weapon with a strangled cry, overcome by a flood of his own worst memories. Not genjutsu. Something crueler. Exposure. Kakashi understood immediately. Fall back from line of sight. Naruto almost admired that. Even now, even in shock, Kakashi adapted, so Naruto escalated. He released a pulse of malice resonance. It spread soundlessly through the gate yard. Not as an explosion, but as a pressure wave of emotional gravity. Everyone caught in it staggered. Sakura saw the hospital corridor where Sasuke nearly died. Iruka felt the emptiness of his parents' loss like fresh cut grief. Several Anbu dropped to one knee under the sudden surfacing of faces they had spent years burying. The wooden gate groaned, its beams sprouting thin black cracks. Kakashi alone drove through it by force of will and struck again. This time Naruto caught his wrist. Their eyes met at close range. Kakashi saw not a demon, not a stranger, but Naruto sharpened into terrible coherence. All the old need burned out of him, leaving will stripped of pleading. Naruto saw Kakashi's grief stacked in layers: Obito, Rin, Minato, every student he had failed or feared failing. A whole architecture of survival built on guilt, disciplined into usefulness. For a heartbeat, the contact became understanding. Then Naruto threw him, not cruelly, not gently, just decisively. Kakashi crashed through the outer gatehouse wall in a burst of splintered timber and stone dust. The impact stunned the yard into silence. Sakura screamed his name. Naruto lowered his hand. He could have killed him. Everyone there knew it. That knowledge spread faster than panic. Iruka looked from the ruined wall back to Naruto and understood the message. Not mercy, demonstration. Naruto was choosing the terms of escalation. "Please," Iruka said again, voice broken now. "Please stop." Naruto turned slowly toward the village beyond the gate. People had gathered farther back now, civilians, shopkeepers, off-duty shinobi, children held behind adults' legs. Faces he knew and faces he had never known. The whole collective body of the Leaf, staring at him with horror, sorrow, confusion, and the dawning realization that he was not outside the village anymore in any meaningful sense. He had already entered them through fear. Now he entered by sight. "I didn't come to destroy Konoha," Naruto said, and his voice carried unnaturally clearly through the gateyard and beyond into the first streets. "Not today." That frightened them more than a threat would have, because if not destruction, then what? Naruto stepped forward through the gate. No one stopped him. Anbu held position but did not attack. Sakura hovered between rage and helplessness. Iruka stood rooted. From the shattered wall, Kakashi dragged himself upright, bleeding from temple and shoulder. One eye squeezed shut, and watched in silence because he understood before the others did that this moment had already passed out of battle and into transformation. Naruto crossed the threshold into Konoha proper. Reality decay followed him, not as random collapse. As conversion, the shadows beneath eaves lengthened and did not retract with the angle of dawn. The bright banners near a dango stand dimmed into wine-dark cloth as if left too long in smoke. Sunlight filtering down the street lost warmth, turning bruised purple at the edges. Stone lanterns lining the road blackened along old cracks, not breaking, merely aging into a more severe shape. The great central avenue remained itself, and yet became something heavier, as if the village's bones were reticulating beneath the skin of familiarity. Citizens backed away in widening waves. Naruto continued at a walking pace. He passed the ramen stand and did not look at it. That omission hurt more than if he had. At intersections, shinobi rallied and then hesitated as Yurei no Hana's dream sorrow pressed against them from alley shadows. Mumei's work deepened. Signs blurred, a few familiar storefront names vanished from memory long enough to seed more disorientation. Kurohane fed invisibly at the edges where hospital fear and household dread met. Tessin, still in the forests beyond, whispered anger into patrol squads trying to establish order, turning clipped commands into arguments. Within the hour, Konoha had not fallen, it had shifted. That was more enduring. By noon, the village's own people had begun using the new phrase without knowing who first said it. The dusk won't lift. By evening, no one called the central district bright. By the second night, lamps burned earlier than necessary, and still seemed insufficient. Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument as the altered village stretched beneath him. The carved faces of leaders past watched out across a land they had helped shape, and in the deepening violet of the sky, their expressions seemed less triumphant than weathered. Below, Konoha's streets carried on. Shops half opened. Families ate. Patrols continued. Medical wards treated shock, exhaustion, and injuries from the gate confrontation. Life did not stop. That was essential. If horror becomes too obvious, people revolt against it cleanly. If life continues under altered terms, adaptation begins. Behind Naruto, the court assembled one by one in the lengthening shadow. Komai surveyed the village below with satisfaction that never needed to become a smile. "The structure holds," he said, "but on your terms now. They can function inside the transformation, which means they will help preserve it." Yurei no Hana gazed down at the houses with hollow tenderness. They will grieve what they cannot name until the naming changes. Tessin cracked his neck. "Still think burning it would have been faster." Naruto did not turn. Faster isn't better. Kurohane perched on the monument's broken edge, looking at the hospital district where fear glowed like embers to his senses. It is feeding beautifully. Mumei stood in a space between stone faces where the eye refused to settle. The old name is weakening. Naruto looked down over the village that had once been the axis of his entire world. He did not feel triumph. That would have implied a goal completed. What he felt was worse, confirmation. Konoha had not needed to be erased to become something else. It only needed someone willing to remove the illusion that its kindness outweighed its cruelties. Under enough pressure, the leaf accepted dusk faster than it would ever admit. He spoke without raising his voice. Konoha is dead. Below them, the village carried on lamps lit, doors closed, conversations hushed. Naruto's eyes burned faintly in the growing dark. Koku no Sato lives, the village of eternal dusk. No proclamation rang out across the streets, no banner unfurled. Names at this scale changed first in spirit, then in speech, then in history books written by survivors who learned what reality preferred to be called. But the court heard it, and the world, in some deeper sense, did too. The sky above the village dimmed another shade. Far below, civilians looked up from evening meals with a sudden, inexplicable certainty that sunset had lasted too long. Kakashi, bandaged and standing on a hospital balcony, felt the name settle into the bones of the place and knew there would be no easy reclaiming of it now. Iruka sat alone in an academy classroom, staring at a desk once occupied by a boy who had wanted acknowledgement badly enough to survive anything, and realized with a grief close to reverence that being known and being saved had never been the same promise. Sakura clenched bloodless fists in the medical wing, and swore through tears that this would not be the end, but even she knew by the altered weight of the air that the battle they had prepared for was not the battle they were now living in. And Naruto, standing atop the monument with darkness obedient around his feet, looked out across the transformed village and understood the shape of his next movement. The leaf had not been annihilated, it had been made example. Now the other nations would learn from its shadow. Chapter 4, The Cascade. Nation by nation, once Konoha changed, the rest of the world made the first mistake all nations make when history begins moving faster than they are comfortable admitting. They treated it as local. Not irrelevant, no one with sense could call the transformation of the Leaf Village irrelevant, but contained. A crisis, a corruption event, a hostile spiritual occupation centered on a single region. The kind of disaster great nations had contingency plans for, even when those plans were mostly composed of denial and old titles spoken with confidence. Messengers rode hard from Fire Country to every major village. Diplomatic channels reopened at speeds usually reserved for war or the death of a cage. Rumors outpaced reports, and reports outpaced truth. In some versions, Naruto Uzumaki had died and a demon wore his skin. In others, Konoha itself had fallen to a forbidden seal network triggered beneath the village decades ago. Some whispered the 9 tails had finally devoured its vessel completely. Others claimed the leaf had engineered the whole event and merely lost control of its own weapon. All of those explanations comforted people, because all of them remained within the logic of the old world: weapons, jinchuriki, seals, villages, betrayal, power. Those were things the 5 great nations understood. They had built themselves around those words. What they did not yet understand was that Konoha had not simply suffered a calamity. It had become an example of a new method. Naruto knew this before the first foreign envoy even reached the altered gates of Koku no Sato. He stood in the roofless court hall of the reclaimed fortress temple as rain drifted sideways through the broken colonnades and listened to Komai outline the next stage. The dark strategist had drawn no maps. He never needed them in the conventional sense. His understanding of nations was structural, not cartographic. He saw them as pressure systems, dependencies, cracks hidden under the paint of ideology. Konoha's transformation has done 2 things simultaneously, Komai said, standing below the throne with folded sleeves and eyes still closed. It has proven that you can overwrite the emotional climate of a major village without reducing it to ash, and it has frightened the other nations into organizing. Tessin, leaning against a fractured pillar with his ever-shifting weapon balanced lazily over one shoulder, grinned. Good. Organized prey is fun. Yurei no Hana sat near the base of the broken altar with her impossible robes spread around her like funeral smoke. Not prey, she said softly. Not yet. A choir, each nation singing a different fear. Kurohane clicked his claws together from the rafters. They are all already feeding him. The news alone is enough. Every border camp imagining its own dusk. Every council chamber pretending fear is strategic caution. Naruto listened without moving. The throne behind him had grown higher over the last week, not through construction but through repeated presence. Shadow and black-veined stone rose from the floor in layered arcs, forming a seat too severe to be called ornate. It was not built for comfort. It was built for inevitability. He still did not sit in it often. The court understood the meaning of restraint. Mume, Naruto said, from the edge of perception, the nameless sovereign answered. The world has begun misremembering Konoha already. Not details, tone, distance. Some speak as if it is still the leaf. Others say eternal dusk without knowing when they learned the phrase. A few records outside Fire Country are changing themselves. Naruto's gaze lifted. That interested him. The spread of his influence had begun exceeding direct proximity. Not in raw force, but in conceptual seepage. Names altering around his reality. Memory choosing the version more aligned with fear. The old world's categories were not merely under attack, they were being edited. Then we don't give them time to stabilize, he said. Komai inclined his head. No, we cascade. The word settled into the hall like a small, elegant death. Cascade meant pressure distributed intelligently. Not one overwhelming strike. A sequence of collapses, each tailored to the weakness already present in the next. The nations would not be treated equally, because equality was a fiction strategy could not afford. Naruto stepped down from the throne's shadow. Tell me. Komai moved one sleeve slightly, and the darkness in the air before him arranged itself into 5 shifting silhouettes, each representing a village not by map line but by emotional contour. Suna first, he said. The silhouette sharpened into a tower of sand and old grief. The sand survives through austerity and familial authority. It presents discipline, but it is built atop generations of scarcity. Its leaders are strongest when united, weakest when blood and office become indistinguishable. Tessen's smile widened. Komai continued. Kiri is recovering, not stable. It tells itself a story about leaving the bloody mist behind. That story remains fragile. Their institutions fear regression more than invasion, remove certainty from the top, and the old panic returns. Mume, Naruto said. The nameless figure bowed once. Kumo? Komai said next, and the shadow image shifted into jagged peaks and thunderheads. Pride, strength, forward momentum, it does not like ambiguity. The cloud believes hardship is defeated through greater force of will. Yurei no Hana can turn that virtue inward until it becomes spiritual suffocation. The grief sovereign lowered her head in quiet agreement. And Iwa, Komai finished, where the silhouette became heavy walls and subterranean lines. Stone loves continuity, endurance, the belief that what lasted yesterday will last tomorrow because stubbornness is indistinguishable from truth. Ruin works best there with very little spectacle. Naruto looked at the final, unspoken silhouette. No need. He already knew whose path crossed outside the structure of nations. Sasuke, he said. The hall went still in a slightly different way, not fear, not exactly, but attention. Komai did not alter tone. He remains external, which makes him useful, though unpredictably so. He is the witness moving between systems. Not yet committed enough to oppose you with clarity, not broken enough to join. A question mark as before. Naruto was silent. He had felt Sasuke at distances, twice now, not by chakra signature the old way, but by the emotional shape of him. Purpose without belonging. Rage disciplined into observation. A bond neither surrendered nor honored. Wherever Sasuke moved, he cut a line through the atmosphere of dread gathering across the nations, not diminishing it, but forcing it to define itself against someone who refused easy submission. That made him dangerous and valuable. He'll follow the pattern, Naruto said. He already is. Komai replied, Tessen pushed off the pillar, so when do we start? Naruto's eyes darkened to deeper gold at the rims. We already did. Sooner the house of sand and blood, the hidden sand, did not receive the first signs as attack, it received them as strain. Sunagakur had always been a village that rationed more than water. It rationed softness, confidence, displays of internal uncertainty. It had survived too many bad years, too many leaders forced into compromise by landscape and war, and the humiliating economics of needing stronger allies. Even under Gaara's rule, with its quieter reforms and moral steadiness, the village still carried old reflexes in its bones. It trusted survival, not peace. That was what made Tessin perfect for it. He arrived not in visible form, but as amplification. A border disagreement between local commanders that should have ended in clipped professionalism instead sharpened into personal insult. A council session about caravan routes dissolved into accusations that resource allocations favored one clan line over another. Training yard rivalries that once burned cleanly into competence lingered after sparring sessions as resentment. Old grievances, never entirely dead, found themselves suddenly alive enough to speak. Tessin did not create any of it from nothing. He merely walked unseen through courtyards and war rooms and let people feel their anger as honesty. That was all wrath ever really needed. At first, Temery noticed it only as fatigue. She returned from an external diplomatic patrol to find the Sand's internal mood brittle. Not openly unstable, worse than that. Controlled in a way that cost too much effort. Guards saluted too stiffly. Advisors phrased criticism like concealed blades. Even ordinary market complaints carried more venom than heat justified. On the second evening after her return, she confronted Kankuro in a private strategy room over a sealed report about militia readiness in the outlying sectors. "You signed off on this without cross-checking border turnout?" she said, dropping the file onto the table between them. Kankuro looked up from where he sat with puppet scrolls spread open and rubbed at his forehead. "I checked the numbers. You checked the summary." "I said I checked it." Under ordinary circumstances, that would have been the end of an annoyance, a correction, sibling friction, then movement. But something stayed in the air after the words landed. A hook, an edge. Temery stared at him. "You're getting careless." Kankuro's head snapped up. The room chilled. "What did you say?" The anger in his voice surprised both of them. Temery's own irritation flared higher in answer, too quickly, like dry fuel catching. "I said careless," she repeated. "Or is that too generous?" Kankuro stood so fast his chair toppled backward. For one stupid instant, they looked not like seasoned shinobi and siblings tempered by war, but like children again bruised by old village expectations. Reflexively sharp because love in the sand had never been gentle. Then the door opened. Gaara stepped in. Silence hit the room like a wall. The Kazekij's presence had that effect even before he spoke. Not because he commanded fear the way previous rulers had, but because his calm had weight. He looked from Temery to Kankuro, then at the toppled chair, then at the untouched report between them. "What happened?" he asked. Neither answered immediately, because there was no good answer. Nothing had happened, and yet something had almost happened. The boundary between ordinary disagreement and fracture had thinned so suddenly neither trusted their own explanation. That was when Tessin smiled in the unseen corner. This was not about making siblings kill one another in a burst of melodrama. That would have been crude. The sand was stronger than that. No, the point was to make them feel the possibility. To remind them that blood and leadership, love and authority were all dangerous compounds in a place where scarcity had always turned emotion into strategy. Gaara picked up the report and read the first page in silence. Temery watched him closely. Something in the room shifted again, not because of Tessin now, but because of what Gaara represented. He was stability built from previous monstrosity. A village's attempt to redeem its own history through one man's restraint. That kind of symbol was always vulnerable. Symbols had to remain legible. Anger blurred them. Gaara set the report down. "The numbers are wrong," he said. Kankuro's face tightened. "I know." Temery inhaled, ready to speak again. Gaara raised one hand. The air stilled. "We correct them, And tomorrow, he said, gaze moving to each of them in turn, we review all command chains touching border logistics. That should have ended it. Instead, Temery heard herself say, if command chains are failing, maybe the issue is higher up than logistics. Kankuro closed his eyes. He knew instantly that she should not have said it. Gaara did not react visibly, but the silence after her words became unbearable. Temery herself felt the shock of them like cold water. That had not been her intention. The criticism was not even coherent yet. It was impulse sharpened by an atmosphere she had failed to recognize soon enough. Still, once spoken, it existed. It hung in the room and changed what each sibling knew the others were capable of saying. Gaara regarded her for several heartbeats. Then, quietly, leave the report. He turned and walked out. Temery stood rigid. Kankuro did not look at her. Outside the office, the desert wind carried more grit than usual through the streets. That night, the sand dreamed of drought. Not literal drought, Suna had known enough of that to differentiate fear from memory. This was something else. A spiritual drought. Wells full of water no one could drink. Storehouses full of grain no one could trust. Families at long tables too polite to name the resentment drying their throats. Yurei no Hana had not yet entered the campaign directly, but Tessen's work had opened the door. Once people began fearing their own anger, grief always found the cracks. Within a week, the village council had split into informal camps around questions that should have remained administrative. Trade redistribution, military readiness, succession philosophy, though no succession crisis yet existed. The more officials insisted this was not political fracture, the more political it became. Gaara responded as Gaara always did, with patience, long hours, and a refusal to let other people's instability dictate his tone. That was noble. It was also exactly why Naruto did not go to Suna personally. A village shaped around one stabilizing figure rarely broke by attacking the figure first. Better to test whether the structure beneath him still knew how to stand without the emotional certainty he provided. Tessen kept turning the wheel. On the 12th day, a routine council dispute over military caravan escorts erupted into public shouting in a corridor outside the Kazekage chambers. Two commanders from lines with old regional rivalry nearly came to blows. Guards intervened. The incident spread through the village by lunchtime, stripped of context and rich in implication. By evening, ordinary citizens were speaking in lowered voices about division in the Kazekage household and unrest in the upper command. That was all Suna needed to start tearing itself in smaller ways. Naruto observed from afar, feeling each flare of distrust rise through the desert like heat from buried coals. He did not smile. He simply understood that the first stone had shifted. Roman 2. Kiri, the village that feared its OWN past Kirigakure, had once baptized itself in blood and called the result strength. Even after reform, even after years of trying to bury the bloody mist beneath better policy and younger leadership, that history remained less buried than staged at a distance. Kiri did not forget. It curated. That meant memory there was both sacred and unstable. Mume entered like mist through a cracked screen. There was no need for violence, no need even for direct appearances. Identity was infrastructure in Kiri more than in any other village, because the village's recovery depended on everyone agreeing that the right people were now in charge, that the old era was over, that names and offices had been successfully rewired away from atrocity. Erase certainty around one of those names, and the old blood in the walls began to pulse. The opportunity came during a diplomatic summit with regional maritime allies, the kind of event Kiri relied upon to project modern legitimacy. Delegates came. Papers were signed. Security tightened. Public order was immaculate. At the center stood the Mizukage, powerful, composed, visible, and for one terrible morning unremembered, not fully, that would have been impossible to hide. No, Mume was far more elegant. The Mizukage name failed first in small places. A clerk preparing meeting documents froze over the title line. She knew who the cage was. She had served this office for years. Yet when her brush hovered over the page, the name itself would not come. She left the space blank, intending to return later. A guard captain briefing foreign escorts referred to the honored office. 3 times, without noticing he had never actually said the person occupying it. 2 advisors, discussing seating placements outside the chamber, discovered they disagreed completely on a detail of their leader's biography that should have been universally known. At first, these seemed like isolated lapses. Then the Mizukage entered the summit hall and felt it. The air did not greet with proper recognition, not politically. Metaphysically, eyes still followed. Bows were still given, but the reflexive alignment of a room around a known center had weakened. For a heartbeat too long, several people in attendance looked as though they were orienting themselves around a title occupying a human shape rather than a person they mentally grasped. The Mizukage was sharp enough to feel danger instantly. Who altered the seating chart? Came the first question, crisp and controlled. No one answered clearly because the seating chart had not been altered. It had become uncertain. That uncertainty spread fast in a political environment built on image. Delegates whispered. Secretaries rechecked seals and credentials. One foreign representative accidentally asked a senior advisor whether the acting office holder would be speaking long today. Acting, the word should have been meaningless. Instead, it detonated through the internal logic of the room. The summit did not collapse dramatically. It frayed. Meetings were delayed. Several documents went unsigned pending verification of procedural irregularities no one could identify. Security protocols thickened. By nightfall, rumors had escaped the building and entered the harbor districts. Something was wrong at the top. Kiri had lived too long in the shadow of leadership terror to respond calmly when the legitimacy of leadership blurred. Old reflexes surfaced. Some said this was a coup. Others that the Mizukage had been assassinated spiritually and replaced with a puppet. Others still whispered that the bloody mist had returned by subtler means and was now eating names before it resumed eating children. Mume walked invisible through the confusion, removing only the smallest additional anchors, a seal ledger here, a memory cue there, one veteran advisor's certainty about how long the current cage had held office. That was enough. The village began producing its own paranoia faster than any external sovereign could have imposed. Border patrols doubled without clear authorization. Internal guard watches were repositioned, which in turn made harbor commanders suspicious that a factional move was underway. Civilian districts emptied early at dusk. Mercantile traffic slowed because merchants feared sudden policy reversal. Every attempt the administration made to reassure the populace only sharpened the question underneath. If nothing was wrong, why did reassurance sound rehearsed? From the fortress temple throne hall, Komai observed reports filtering through stolen channels and nodded once. "Excellent," he said. "They are not fighting a hostile force. They are fighting the possibility that the category of legitimate authority has thinned." Naruto watched the black water in a cracked basin reflect a sky nowhere near the same color as the one above them. "Will it hold?" he asked. "For now," Komai said. "Which is ideal. Collapses teach more when delayed." Naruto could feel Kiri as a pressure system at the edge of his growing emotional range, wet, cold, tightening. A village trying to remember itself hard enough that memory turned to strain. It fed him differently than Konoha had. Less personal grief, more institutional fear. Useful. He turned away from the basin. And Kumo, at that, Yurei no Hana's drowned eyes lifted. "Mine," she said. Roman 3. Kumo, the mountain of pride, the hidden cloud, did not fear weakness. It despised it. That had been the logic shaping Kumo across generations. Strength as virtue, resilience as proof, momentum as identity. Even their grief wore iron around the jaw. They endured publicly, trained harder, struck faster, climbed higher. The world might break other people through loss or uncertainty, but the Cloud Village had taught itself to treat pain like altitude difficult, yes, but something lungs eventually adapted to. Yurei no Hana found that almost tender. Pride always grieved hardest when shown the record of its failures. She entered Kumo not through sleep at first, but through memory preserved in stone. The village training grounds, war monuments, memorial plaques, and lightning-scored tower walls all carried a different kind of residue than Konoha's. Less intimate loneliness, more accumulated expectation. The demand to be unyielding had soaked into the architecture. So she began with the veterans. A retired Jonin dreamed he stood again on a battlefield where he had once survived by leaving 2 subordinates behind. He woke hearing their names spoken in the exact, disappointed tone he had spent 15 years training loud enough to drown out. A censor captain reviewing old conflict maps suddenly remembered every border incident the Cloud had failed to prevent, not as footnotes, but as burning emotional facts. Shame curdled into defensiveness by breakfast. A young elite trainee, proud and rising, dreamed that all her future victories were built atop one moment of panic she had never actually shown anyone. The dream was false in detail, true in emotional effect. She spent the next day overcompensating so hard that she injured a partner in sparring. Yurei no Hana layered these experiences carefully, never enough to call obvious attack, just enough that the village's belief in its own psychological invulnerability became the wound. Within days, training accidents increased. Not from incompetence, but from people pushing harder to disprove their own shaken certainty. Officers cut sleep to maintain standards. Squad leaders snapped at hesitation. Morning rituals once held privately for fallen comrades resurfaced in awkward public fragments because too many shinobi woke raw and angry and needed to call that feeling discipline. Then she touched the Raikage's outer circle, not the Raikage directly at first. He was too forcefully himself to bruise easily by proxy. But she did not need to strike the mountain head-on. She only needed to turn its weather. An aide forgot to redact casualty projections from a hypothetical defense scenario and sent them up the chain. A senior combat advisor misread an old battlefield evaluation as current intelligence and demanded immediate review of protocols that had not been relevant in years. The resulting meeting should have been a boring exercise in bureaucratic correction. Instead, it turned into a shouting match about whether the Cloud had grown complacent. That word traveled like a toxin. Complacent. In Kumo, that accusation was never administrative. It was existential. To call the Cloud complacent was to imply it had betrayed the very ethic justifying its power. By the time the Raikage himself entered the conversation, half the room was already operating from wounded pride. He silenced them, of course. The Raikage was a force even seated, all-coiled authority and whether forged impatience. His presence alone shut down lesser tempests. He listened to the full account, dismissed the faulty report, corrected the chain, and ordered every relevant department back to clear operational focus. That should have worked. For ordinary fear, it would have. But Yurei no Hana was not feeding fear. She was feeding failure. That night the Raikage dreamed. He stood on an endless mountain ridge above storm clouds, each cloud containing a battle the Cloud had won, or believed it had won. As he watched, the clouds below began turning transparent, showing not victories but costs, bodies, civilian destruction, compromises hidden under triumphant narratives. The moment's strength had not saved people fast enough. The moment's force had mistaken itself for justice because there had been no time to interrogate the difference. At the horizon stood figures he could not fully identify: fallen shinobi, rivals, former enemies, maybe even younger versions of himself, all looking at him not with accusation, but with unbearable expectation. When he woke, his fists had shattered the stone armrests of his chair. He went immediately to the tower balcony, looked out over Kumo's training grounds and towers and storm-lit peaks, and felt something he had not permitted in years. Uncertainty about whether strength alone could still hold the line. He hated it. That hatred nourished Naruto like distant thunder. The Raikage responded the only way he knew how: with action. Emergency combat reviews, stricter readiness drills, internal evaluation of mental resilience across elite squads. It was not the wrong response. In fact, it was one of the most intelligent any of the Great Cage could have made. It still played into the cascade, because the harder the cloud tried to prove itself unbroken, the more every crack mattered. Squads exhausted themselves. Minor failures took on symbolic weight. Rumors spread that the Raikage had seen some vision and was preparing for a conflict he would not name. Citizens became proud and frightened at once, which in Kumo translated into brittle public confidence and private overpreparation. Storehouses filled. Watch posts reinforced. Patrol routes widened. The whole village tensed like a muscle bracing against a blow not yet thrown. At the fortress temple, Naruto felt the difference. Kumo did not feed like Konoha or Kiri. It fed in surges. Pride bruised into defiance, defiance cracking into frustration, frustration hardening into fear only when no one was allowed to say the word fear aloud. Yurei no Hana drank from that process elegantly, and what flowed back to Naruto was dense with electrical bitterness. Tessen watched the reports with open amusement. They're punching their own reflection. Not yet, Yurei no Hana murmured, but they've started flinching at it. Naruto stood at the edge of the roofless hole, looking north. The cloud would fight hardest when he arrived there. He knew that. Kumo would prefer direct confrontation to the slow reinterpretation that had consumed Konoha. It had warriors who would rather die standing than adapt beneath dusk. That was why he respected it more than some of the others. Respect, he had learned, need not interfere with conquest. Roman 4. IWA the weight of stone, the hidden stone, was the simplest. That did not make it easy. Iwagakure had survived by teaching itself to be older than every crisis. Its leaders changed. Its wars ended and resumed in different clothes. But the village's true doctrine was continuity. Dig in. Endure. Be harder to move than the forces trying to move you. History in Iwa was less story than sediment. Komai adored such systems. He went there almost alone. No dreams, no wrath, no erasure except in the smallest of supporting places. Ruin for Iwa would be enough. He began with infrastructure. Not spectacular failures. Those would have caused immediate mobilization. Instead, retaining walls showed stress too early in the season. Storage vault seals weakened with no apparent tampering. Archive stones carved to outlast centuries began shedding dust from names near their lower edges. A bridge crucial for ore transport developed cracks that engineers insisted made no sense based on the age and condition of the material. In Iwa, that kind of thing was not treated as mere maintenance. Stone knew when stone should last, and when it didn't, people listened. Komai walked the village in the shape of a bent archivist one day, a stonemason's ancestor in half-memory the next, and an old official whom no one consciously recognized but many deferred to anyway. Wherever he passed, long-lasting things felt briefly mortal, not destroyed, just less guaranteed. That was enough to disturb the village's spiritual posture. Engineers worked late. Administrative councils argued over whether a sabotage network was active. Old war bunkers were reopened for inspection. Suddenly, the entire village became aware of how much of its confidence relied not on ideology alone, but on the physical integrity of structures assumed to be eternal. When a section of an inner administrative stair collapsed under light traffic, injuring no one, but happening in a place built specifically never to fail, the psychological damage far exceeded the practical. Impossible became the most dangerous word in the village. Because once something impossible happens in a society built on endurance, every other assumption must be retested. Komai loved retesting. He reported back to Naruto with dust at the cuffs and a satisfaction too refined for open pride. I gave them mortality, he said. Naruto, seated at last in the dark throne as stormlight moved across the hall, regarded him quietly. And how did they receive it? As insult, Komai said. Then as engineering challenge, then very quietly as dread. Tessen barked a laugh from below, stone dreads, that I'd pay to see. Komai's closed eyes turned slightly toward him. All things dread when permanence reveals itself to have been rental property. Even Naruto smiled at that. It was contribution to the cascade fed differently again. Not personal or proud, but subterranean. The fear there was slow and heavy like pressure in a mine before a collapse. Harder to harvest quickly. Richer over time, Naruto let it accumulate. He was learning patience at empire scale. The witness between nations, Sasuke Uchiha, did not belong to the cascade. That was precisely why he moved through it so cleanly. He traveled without banner, without village sanction, without the comforting fiction of neutrality. People assumed things when they saw him missing Nin, avenger, rogue ally, dangerous asset, but none of those labels settled fully anymore. He let them slide off. His purpose was not diplomacy, nor open resistance, nor reconciliation. He moved because stillness felt like surrender, and he had not yet decided to whom he would refuse surrender. He saw the sand first, not its political arguments in detail, but the atmosphere around them. Patrol squads too tense, streets quieter at dusk despite no curfew. Temari on a rooftop outside the administrative quarter, staring into the desert with a face that looked like she had been forced to distrust her own temper. She noticed him before he chose whether to reveal himself. "Going to keep lurking," she said without turning. "Or has the mystery act become permanent?" Sasuke stepped into visible range. Temari's relief lasted less than a second before anger covered it. "You've seen him." It wasn't a question. "Yes. Then tell me how this ends." He looked out over the desert instead of at her. "If I knew that, I'd be somewhere else." That infuriated her because it was honest. Temari crossed her arms tightly. "Something's happening here, to us, to all of us." "Yes, caused by him." Sasuke did not answer immediately because causation had grown unclear. Naruto was responsible, certainly. But the method mattered. He was not imposing entirely foreign states on these nations. He was activating truths already present, histories already waiting, structures already brittle. The darkness coming out of Koku no Sato did not simply conquer weakness, it illuminated it cruelly. "Not alone," Sasuke said at last. Temari's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like an excuse." "It's not." He left before she asked the next question, because the next question would have required choosing a position more final than he possessed. In Kiri, he saw officials walking carefully around their own uncertainty. Every sentence overchecked, every gesture slightly delayed by the fear of procedural error. In Kumo, he watched elite shinobi train harder than necessary with the expression of people trying to punish doubt out of themselves. In Iwa, he stood in the dust of a collapsed inner stair and listened to engineers talk in hushed tones about material fatigue, while everyone in earshot pretended not to hear the deeper phrase forming behind the technical language. What if the village can break? Sasuke carried all of it with him. Everywhere he went, people wanted one of two things from him. Either they wanted him to confirm Naruto could still be stopped, or they wanted him to explain what Naruto had become in words that kept the world familiar. He gave them neither. Because every time he thought he had found the right category corrupted Jinchuriki, spiritual sovereign, living curse, Naruto exceeded it by another step. He was not merely stronger than before. He had become strategic in a way that terrified Sasuke more than raw power would have. The old Naruto would have challenged the world to a fight. This one was teaching it to kneel before the fight even began. And still, beneath all of that, Sasuke could feel the person he had once tried to kill and save in the same motion. That was the poison. If Naruto had become wholly other, opposition would have been easy, necessary, clean. But sometimes, at the edge of perception, or in the reports of those who had spoken directly with him, Sasuke caught glimpses of the old emotional architecture translated into darker logic. The need to be known turned imperial. The hatred of falsehood turned absolutist. The old refusal to abandon people turned into a refusal to let nations hide from what they were. It was monstrous. It also made sense. That was what Sasuke hated most. He reached the outer forests of Fire Country again at dusk after weeks of movement through anxious borders and strained capitals. The air there felt different now, heavier, Not because of weather, because Koku no Sato's conceptual shadow had spread farther than maps could justify. He knew before he saw him that Naruto was nearby. The forest had gone silent in a circle too precise to be natural. Sasuke stopped in a clearing where black moss had overtaken the roots of old trees. "You've been following the pattern," Naruto said from the dark ahead. He stepped out without escort, though Sasuke knew the sovereign court was never far in any meaningful sense. For a moment they simply regarded one another. Naruto looked more settled than at the gate of Konoha, not more human, more sovereign. The change in him had stopped feeling recent and begun feeling institutional. As if the world itself had started adjusting posture around his continued existence. Sasuke's hand rested loosely near his sword. "I've been seeing what you're doing," Naruto tilted his head slightly. "And?" Sasuke's jaw tightened. "You're not conquering them, you're proving they were already weak." The smallest flicker crossed Naruto's face, approval perhaps, or annoyance at being understood. "There's a difference." Sasuke took one step forward. "Yes," Naruto waited. "Conquest is external." Sasuke said, "It forces a new order onto something that resists it. What you're doing is worse. You're making people feel complicit in their own collapse." The forest stayed very still. At length Naruto said, "Because they are." Sasuke exhaled sharply through his nose. "You always did this." For the first time in the encounter, Naruto looked genuinely curious. "Did what?" "Took everything personally." Sasuke's voice hardened. "The village hurt you, so now the world has to be guilty in the same language." The words hung between them. In another life, years earlier, they might have started a fight immediately. Anger would have surged cleanly into impact. Now Naruto simply looked at him, not coldly, not even defensively, just with that unbearable calm sharpened by something older than chakra. "You think this is revenge," he said. "It started there." Naruto considered that. "Maybe," he said, "but revenge is smaller than this." Sasuke hated the answer because it too felt true. He drew his sword halfway, not an attack, a boundary. "If there's any part of you still choosing rather than only becoming," he said, "then choose to stop before there's nothing left to stop." Naruto's eyes darkened at the edges. "Is that what you're doing?" he asked softly. "Choosing, or are you still standing outside everything because deciding would make you responsible for the result?" That hit harder than any jutsu. Sasuke's grip tightened. Naruto took one step closer. "No village owns you now, no teacher, no clan expectation, no curse mark, no brother, so what are you, Sasuke?" The question cut into the clearing and stayed there. Sasuke said nothing, because he did not know. Because he had built himself for so long around opposition that a world reconfiguring beneath him without asking left him with only motion and judgment, not destination. Naruto saw the silence and did not gloat. That was somehow worse than mockery. "At least I became something," he said. Then he turned. Sasuke's hand moved before thought. Sword cleared the sheath in a flash of steel and lightning. Naruto did not even face him. He raised 2 fingers over one shoulder, and the strike stopped against black gold distortion with a shriek that sent birds exploding from trees miles away. For a heartbeat, Sasuke pushed harder. Naruto's counterforce met him effortlessly. Then Naruto lowered his hand and the sword was released. No wound, no clash, only proof. "I'm not your final battle," Naruto said without turning back. "Not yet." He stepped into the deepening dark between the trees and vanished. Sasuke remained in the clearing, chest tight, sword still humming faintly with spent force. He knew then, with a clarity almost relieving in its cruelty, that he was no longer chasing Naruto to save him. He was chasing him because if the world ended up remade in this new image of honest darkness, someone had to witness where the line between truth and surrender had finally broken. And because some part of him, the oldest, ugliest, most loyal part, still refused to let Naruto become unchallenged reality. That, too, was a kind of bond. VI. The end of the old balance. By the end of the season, no major village had fallen. That was what made the situation unbearable. Had Naruto swept across the nations in fire and spectacle, alliances would have solidified immediately. War councils would have declared a common enemy. Shinobi logic would have returned cleanly. Threat, mobilization, battle, victory, or defeat. Instead, each nation was compromised according to its own nature. Suna by internalized familial strain and political suspicion. Kiri by uncertainty at the level of legitimacy itself. Kumo by pride poisoned into overcompensation. Iwa by the revelation that endurance was not immortality. Koku no Sato by transformation complete enough to stand as precedent. And in the space between them moved Sasuke, unwanted by all, necessary to none, yet somehow still the story's last unresolved refusal. Naruto stood on the upper platform of the fortress temple one night while storm clouds moved beneath the plateau instead of above it, and felt the sum of it. 5 nations, 5 different atmospheres of fear, strain, pride, grief, and slow collapse. None fully conquered, all altered. His malice resonance had changed with the scale. It no longer felt like hunger alone. It felt like weather system, empire, inheritance. Behind him, the sovereign court assembled in silence, each carrying the aftertaste of their campaigns. Tessen was radiant with barely contained violence. Yurei no Hana moved like a funeral song pleased with its audience. Mume was harder now to think around for too long. Kurohane's feathers shone oil-dark with consumed vitality. Komai, dust-sleeved and perfectly poised, looked almost priestly in his satisfaction. Naruto did not need to turn to know them there. The world is leaning, Komai said. Naruto looked out across the dim land. Yes, not enough to fall. Tessen complained. Yet, Yurei no Hana corrected. Kurohane lowered his beaked face. It already tastes different. Naruto let the silence stretch. Then, at last, he spoke. Good. The word rolled through the ruined temple and out across the plateau. Far away, in villages and roads and border camps, people sleeping uneasily under wrong-colored skies shivered without knowing why. We're done demonstrating, Naruto said. Below, the clouds flashed with lightning that never reached the ground. The court listened. The next phase won't be a haunting, he continued. It'll be selection. Komai's closed eyes tilted slightly upward. Selection of what? Naruto's gaze sharpened toward the horizon, where the great nations still stood but no longer stood comfortably. Which parts of the old world deserve to remain useful, he said, and which parts only know how to resist by lying about themselves? Tessen grinned like a drawn blade. Mume seemed to deepen in place. Yurei no Hana's hollow eyes brightened with pale ruin. And far away, somewhere between nations and names, Sasuke Uchiha stopped in his travels for no reason he could explain and looked toward the dark plateau, as though the world itself had just taken its next breath. The cascade had not ended the age. It had taught every power in the shinobi world that the age could end. And once people learn that their era is not inevitable, they begin living differently, even before the final proof arrives. Naruto felt that knowledge moving through the land like a second nightfall. He had not yet devoured the world. He had merely convinced it that dusk was no longer temporary. Chapter 5, The Devouring. Ascension to primordial. By the time the cascade had settled into the bones of the world, even the tailed beasts began to feel it. They felt it differently than humans did. Human fear moved through rumor, memory, speech, institutions, and all the fragile stories people built to protect themselves from acknowledging how easily meaning could rot. But the tailed beasts were older than stories told by villages, older than hidden nations, older than the systems that turned land into borders and children into weapons. They perceived shifts in the world the way mountains perceived earthquakes, not as opinion, but as alterations in the pressure of existence itself. And Naruto had become pressure. Across forests, deserts, islands, and ravines, the great beasts turned their attention toward the growing dusk emanating from Fire Country and beyond. Some sensed it in the dimming of spiritual currents, some in the wrongness of human emotion becoming geographically dense. Some simply looked up at the sky and recognized that the light no longer behaved with the innocence it once had. The world was being ruled by something that had once been a vessel. That, more than anything else, disturbed them. because Jinchuriki had always been proof of human arrogance. Humans found ancient beings too dangerous to leave free, too useful to leave untouched, and too powerful to understand, so they sealed them into flesh, weaponized suffering, and called the arrangement balance. The beasts hated that logic differently, each according to temperament, but all of them knew its shape. They had all felt humanity's fear translated into chains. Now one of those chains had broken, and what rose from the fracture did not seek freedom in the simple sense. It sought redefinition. Naruto, standing atop the fortress temple's highest platform beneath a bruised sky that had not shown an honest dawn in weeks, closed his eyes and reached outward. The world answered in currents. He could feel Koku no Sato humming beneath its permanent dusk, the altered heart of fire country pulsing like a second organ in the land. He could feel Suna's familial tensions still unresolved, Kiri's leadership uncertainty like cold mist around a blade, Kumo's pride grinding against the edge of fear, Iwa's buried dread settling into stone foundations. But beneath all of that deeper, older, heavier there were other presences. Immense, watching, not human minds, not even cursed sovereigns. The tailed beasts were simpler and more terrible than both. They were not born from ordinary hatred or grief. They were concentrations of power given identity, ancient enough that being used by generations of humans had made them cynical, proud, wounded, and suspicious in unique combinations. Naruto could feel them now because he had stopped being legible only to humans. He had become something beings like them were forced to acknowledge. Behind him, the sovereign court assembled in a half-circle beneath the open sky. Komai stood with sleeves folded, dust spilling at the edges where his form failed to hold perfect cohesion. Yurei no Hana watched the horizon with pale, drowned eyes full of elegant sorrow. Tessen leaned with theatrical impatience against a pillar whose cracks had already turned black. Mume remained in that impossible position of being obviously present and difficult to remember at the same time. Kurohane perched above them all like a starved saint of carrion, needle teeth hidden behind the vertical line of its mask. Naruto did not open his eyes. "They've noticed," he said. Yurei no Hana inclined her head. "Of course they have." "Will they come?" Tessen asked, grinning like he hoped the answer would be war. Naruto opened his eyes. Some. The wind shifted, far away, over land and sea. Enormous consciousnesses adjusted their attention toward him. A few recoiled immediately. One burned with wary curiosity, another with ancient rage. One with the cracked, malicious laughter of something that had been treated as a monster for so long, it had eventually decided the role fit. Kurama stirred inside Naruto like a red sun beneath black water. "They won't all answer your call." Naruto's expression remained still. "I'm not calling them like summons." That was true. He was not pulling them by force, at least not yet. What he radiated now was not command in the old shinobi sense. It was invitation sharpened into inevitability. A declaration that the world's old categories were failing, and that any power ancient enough to understand what human civilization had done with fear and captivity now had a choice to make: stand outside the new age and be hunted by its shape, or enter it and bargain from within. Kurama gave no verbal reply, but Naruto felt the fox's regard deepen. The first to approach the first beast to come was not one of the proud or noble ones. It was Shukaku. That alone would have made the moment strange even before the transformed world around Naruto added its own weight to it. The one tail had always carried madness like a badge, and a wound simultaneously sharp-toothed, abrasive, unstable in the eyes of most humans. Though Naruto had long since learned that instability in beings like Shukaku often meant they had simply been forced to remember too much too loudly. He arrived at dusk, which in Naruto's domain no longer meant a time of day so much as a sustained state of atmosphere. The desert wind came first, not natural wind. Sand-laden and cold, moving over the plateau in spirals despite there being no desert for miles. The court sensed the presence immediately. Tessen straightened with interest. Kurohane spread black feathered robes fractionally, tasting dry hostility in the air. Komai said nothing, but a small crack in one of the platform's edge stones widened as if in anticipation. Then the sand gathered. It rose from nowhere apparent, spinning into a towering column at the center of the outer court, before collapsing inward into a shape too familiar to Naruto's old life to be mistaken. Massive, squat, clawed, striped by dark sealing marks of older worlds, with ringed eyes and a mouth too eager to bear teeth even at rest. Shukaku looked around the fortress temple, then up at the sky, then finally at Naruto. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Shukaku cackled. It was a harsh, rattling sound, half laughter and half the scream of rock being ground to powder. "Well, well," the one-tail rasped. "The little caged child really did break wrong." Tessen grinned openly. Yurei Nohana looked unimpressed. Naruto remained where he stood on the upper platform, one hand resting lightly on the black stone of the parapet. "You came," Naruto said. Shukaku's eyes narrowed with feral delight. "Of course I came. Do you know how loud you are now? Every cursed wind across the continent tastes like your mood." He tilted his head, grin widening into something uncomfortably thoughtful. "Besides, I wanted to see whether the stories were accurate about what you did to the leaf, about how the nations are twitching, about whether a human finally got so sick of being used he chose to become the thing everyone always feared he might be." Naruto descended the steps slowly. The court did not move to intercept. He stopped a measured distance from the one tail, close enough to acknowledge equality of presence, far enough to avoid the insult of casual familiarity. "And?" Naruto asked. Shukaku's grin did not fade, but something older than mockery entered his expression. "And I think you're honest," he said. The word settled strangely over the court. Honest. Coming from a being like Shukaku, it did not mean virtuous. It meant unhidden, unpretending, free of the sentimental disguises humans usually use to perfume domination. Naruto regarded the beast in silence. Shukaku's claws dug into the platform stones, leaving grooves that blackened at the edges where Naruto's influence licked back against the act. "Humans always said they wanted peace," the one-tail went on. "And then they made villages, armies, jinchuriki, councils, treaties with knives folded inside them." His voice sharpened into remembered scorn. "They called us monsters while breeding worse things out of paperwork and banners." A dry hiss escaped Kurohane, which might have been amusement. Shukaku's gaze fixed fully on Naruto. "But you," his tone lowered. "You aren't pretending this is mercy?" "No." "Good." The word cracked like a bone. Shukaku looked around at the sovereign court assembled in shadow and ruin. "You built yourself a kingdom of ugly truths." Naruto's eyes glowed faintly at the rims. "Yes." The one tail sat back on his haunches with surprising stillness for something so abrasive. For a fleeting instant he looked not insane, but ancient old enough to have watched human hypocrisy repeat past the point of humor. "Then I'll speak plainly," he said. "I won't kneel, I won't be sealed. I won't be anyone's battery or badge." His grin returned, all fangs and sandstorm malice. "But I would very much enjoy seeing the shinobi world forced to look in a mirror it can't punch." Tessen laughed out loud. Naruto inclined his head the slightest degree. "Then stand with me." Shukaku's eyes brightened with the cracked pleasure of a thing rarely offered terms without chains. "That," he said, "I can do." The agreement was not sealed by ritual. It did not need to be. The air around them shifted as if the world itself accepted the new geometry. One tail and dark sovereign. Not vessel and prison. Not beast and handler. Two forms of ancient grievance choosing temporary alignment because the old world had earned neither of their restraint. Behind Naruto, Kurama stirred. No words yet, just attention. Roman 2. The ones who resisted if Shukaku was the first to approach, Matatabi was the first to challenge. The two tails came at night through blue fire. No warning preceded her except a sudden thinning of temperature and the smell of smoke that carried no ash. Then the tree line east of the fortress temple ignited in spectral cobalt flame, and from that living blaze stepped a creature as graceful as a curse, and as proud as a queen long denied a proper court. Her body moved with feline elegance stretched to impossible scale, every line of her made of luminous blue fire wrapped around darker substance. Her eyes were clear, intelligent, and entirely unimpressed by thrones. The court reacted differently this time. Kurohane hunched slightly forward in anticipation, tasting the immense life force beneath Matatabi's spiritual fire. Tessin rolled his shoulders, as if hoping she had brought violence as tribute. Yurei no Hana watched the cat beast with the calm of old grief regarding old pride. Shukaku, now lurking at the outer ring of the courtyard with all the posture of a jackal enjoying other people's tension, gave a dry chuckle. Naruto stepped forward alone, Matatabi's flame eyes fixed on him. "So," she said, voice low and smooth and edged like polished obsidian, "the world's newest tyrant wears a familiar face." Naruto did not flinch. "I didn't ask you here." "No," Matatabi replied. "You simply rewrote the atmosphere of the continent until ignoring you became impossible." There was no fear in her, only judgment. That interested Naruto more than rage would have. "And yet you came." "I came," she said, "to see whether rumor had exaggerated your arrogance." Naruto regarded her for a moment, and Matatabi's blue flames flared higher along her shoulders. "No," she said, "rumor was too kind." The first strike was not physical, it was moral. Matatabi circled the edge of the courtyard, paws leaving rings of cold blue fire on black stone. "Humans caged us, yes, used us, yes, named us monsters so they could excuse their own ugliness. None of that is new. We have endured it longer than their villages have existed." Her eyes narrowed. "But your answer to that history is not freedom, it is dominion." Tessin muttered, "Here we go." Naruto's expression remained composed. "My answer is honesty." "No," Matatabi said softly. "Your answer is hunger so wounded it has convinced itself that becoming vast makes it just." The words struck the courtyard with unusual force, because some part of them was sharp enough to cut near truth without owning all of it. Shukaku barked a laugh, delighted by the friction. Naruto looked at Matatabi a long while before speaking. "You think because you can name the wound, you've defeated what it became." "I think," Matatabi replied, "that a world ruled by your pain is still a world ruled by captivity. Only now the prison wears better poetry." That made even Yurei no Hana go still. Naruto felt Kurama listening closely from within, not intervening, not defending, just listening as another beast voiced the question the fox himself had not yet chosen to press. The dark around Naruto's feet deepened. "You're proud," he said. "I am. And you think pride keeps you free." "It keeps me from kneeling to a new jailer merely because he uses the language of truth instead of righteousness." There it was, not fear of power, fear of repetition. Naruto understood it too well to dismiss it. That was why he did not try persuasion a second time. The first movement came so quickly, it looked like the conversation itself had decided to become violence. Matatabi lunged in a streak of blue flame, crossing the courtyard with impossible feline speed and striking not at Naruto's body, but at the shadow pooled around him, perhaps sensing instinctively that his true change no longer lived merely in flesh. Her claws hit the ground where he had been a fraction earlier, shearing through black stone and detonating blue fire in a ring wide enough to knock Tessin into laughter and crack 3 pillars outright. Naruto reappeared above her, standing in midair as if the concept of footing had grown negotiable around him. Then he dropped one hand. Shadow answered, not a jutsu, not chakra manipulation as shinobi would understand it. A vertical plane of black gold pressure slammed down toward Matatabi like a guillotine made of dusk. She twisted aside in a plume of blue fire, but not fully. The edge caught her flank and sent her skidding across the courtyard in a spray of sparks and molten stone. The battle that followed was terrible in its beauty. Matatabi fought like fire given intellect. No wasted motion, no roar-heavy spectacle. Each leap rewrote the temperature of the air. Each claw stroke left arcs of blue ghost flame burning across stone and shadow alike. She struck at angles that would have shredded most cage before thought could catch up, and when Naruto countered, she was already elsewhere, molten grace and ancient refusal. Naruto did not pursue with brute speed. He changed the battlefield. The courtyard stretched. Walls darkened. Space around Matatabi thickened with the emotional residue of every village that had burned in war, every host made weapon, every moment captivity had been renamed necessity. He was not simply fighting her body. He was saturating the environment with a truth she had spent centuries surviving. Matatabi roared, then not in fear, but in fury at being forced to move through that history made ambient. Blue fire exploded outward, consuming one entire side of the outer court. Kurohane hissed and took flight to the ruined beams overhead. Tessen whooped like this was the best entertainment he had seen in decades. Shukaku sat utterly still, ringed eyes intent. Matatabi landed atop a shattered column and glared down at Naruto through blue flame. "You're strong," she said, "but strength and right are not the same." Naruto stood amid the dark pressure radiating from him like a second body. "I didn't claim they were." "Then what are you claiming?" The answer came without delay, that the old world no longer deserves first refusal. For the first time, Matatabi hesitated, not because she lacked a counter-argument, because she knew exactly how much of the world's suffering had been justified by those in power claiming the right to go first, to decide first, to use first. His words struck close to a truth she hated being unable to dismiss cleanly. That hesitation cost her. Naruto raised his hand. The entire courtyard's shadows lunged upward. They wrapped around Matatabi not as chains, but as concepts solidified the accumulated grief of every beast ever sealed, every host ever sacrificed, every lie ever told in the name of balance. She burned against them instantly, blue fire devouring layer after layer, but more kept rising, not endless, just enough. Naruto stepped closer. "Join me," he said. Matatabi's flames surged higher, but her body had gone still inside the dark. "No." The refusal was clear, proud, final. Naruto held her gaze. Then he closed his hand. What happened next was neither clean absorption nor vulgar devouring. He did not consume her identity whole. He tore loose a vast portion of the power animating her resistance and forced it through the architecture of his malice resonance, translating beast chakra and ancient will into something compatible with his new nature. Blue fire collapsed inward. The courtyard shook. The sky above the fortress temple flashed black instead of white. Matatabi screamed once not because she was dying, but because being partially taken by something like Naruto hurt on levels ordinary defeat never reached. When the blast of power subsided, she was gone. Not annihilated, fled. A diminished streak of blue fire tore across the northern horizon, escaping into night beyond Naruto's immediate reach. Komai exhaled softly. "One escaped," he said. Naruto lowered his hand. Yes, he felt the truth of it. Matatabi had lost something enormous, a portion of power, dignity, certainty, but not everything. She had escaped as prophecy, wound, and future problem. That was acceptable. Not all resistance needed immediate termination. Sometimes what fled carried fear farther. The four tails did not arrive through grace. Son Goku came like a volcanic eruption forced into walking shape. The ground warned them first. Tremors under the plateau, stone heat rising from beneath. Then the western cliffs split with a sound like the mountain itself coughing blood, and out of the cracked rock hauled a massive simian form plated in living magma and old wrath. Lava dripped from his arms. His eyes burned with the exhausted pride of something ancient enough to have been insulted beyond surprise. Unlike Matatabi, he wasted no breath on elegant philosophy. "I heard," he said, every word like a furnace door opening, "that a human has started speaking like he belongs above gods." Tessen practically applauded. Naruto stood at the head of the court and looked up into the enormous heat of the four tails without visible concern. "I didn't say gods." Son Goku bared magma-lit teeth. "Good, I've killed enough human blasphemers to know the scent." No invitation was offered. No terms proposed. This one had come to test by violence alone. His fist hit the plateau like a falling volcano. The fortress temple shook from foundation to broken roof. Entire stairways shattered. Lava burst through cracks in the black stone courtyard and raced toward the central hall in molten veins. The sovereign court scattered outward in controlled arcs, not retreat, merely spatial respect for a fight between powers large enough to ruin their own staging grounds. Naruto met the second strike head-on. Son Goku's great burning fist descended with enough raw force to flatten fortifications. Naruto rose into it in a burst of black-gold distortion, caught the strike on crossed forearms, and for one impossible instant, the plateau held two philosophies of power in perfect collision: primal might and malice made imperial. The impact sounded across half the region. Forests bent away from the shockwave, mountains farther off shed rock from their faces. In Koku no Sato, civilians looked up from midday tasks as the sky flickered wrong and every shadow lengthened at once. Son Goku drove forward with pure physical ferocity. No finesse, no negotiation. He fought like the first fires that taught humans awe and danger simultaneously. Every blow dripped molten ruin. Every roar carried contempt for a world that kept treating beings like him as resources rather than elders. Naruto gave ground once, only once. Then the dark around him deepened and he changed, not physically in a simple sense. The shape of him remained human-sized, but his presence expanded into the environment until the battlefield itself became a body through which he moved. Son Goku swung and struck not Naruto's torso, but a fold in space thickened by despair. Naruto reappeared behind him, palm striking the beast's back with a pulse of compressed malice resonance so dense it turned magma black at the edges. The four tails roared and spun, molten tails sweeping in an arc wide enough to erase a tower remnant completely. Naruto ducked under it and touched the ground. Reality decay spread. The stone beneath Son Goku's feet aged, fractured, hollowed, turning stable support into ruin in less than a breath. The beast dropped one shoulder into the collapsing platform and immediately tried to convert the fall into a forward mauling lunge, pure instinctive warfare honed across centuries. Naruto met him with shadow spears rising from the cracks. They pierced molten shoulder, forearm, chest not deeply enough to kill, but enough to anchor the beast for a heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Kurohei needed. Without command, the Hunger Sovereign dived from above and sank black claws into the steaming wound Naruto had opened, not to steal Son Goku's life directly, but to siphon the excess vitality and convert it into a surge of malice resonance fed back to Naruto through the court's geometry. Son Goku's eyes widened. Naruto stepped in close. This time when he spoke, his voice carried the echo of every nation already dimmed beneath his ascent. You mistake me for alone. The palm he placed against the Four Tails' chest was almost gentle, then he devoured. Power rushed through the plateau like a second magma flow, but colder in essence. Red-orange beast chakra twisted into black-gold currents as Naruto drew in not just energy, but narrative the Four Tails' pride, fury, history of being bound and misunderstood, all of it forced through the architecture of the new age. Son Goku fought like a cataclysm trapped in a narrowing chamber, but every struggle only fed the translation. When it ended, the sky above the fortress temple had gone nearly black at midday. The Four Tails was gone, not escaped, taken. Naruto stood in the center of a molten ruin, eyes burning so bright the void around them seemed cut from the world. The sovereign court bowed their heads fractionally, acknowledging the step that had just been completed. He had crossed another threshold. Not merely strong enough to fight tailed beasts, strong enough to incorporate them. Roman 3. The ones who fled, the ones who chose news travels differently among beings like the tailed beasts, no messenger hawks, no sealed scrolls, no intelligence network in the human sense. They knew through spiritual shock, through the absence where another great consciousness should have been. through the way the world's emotional weather convulsed when something as ancient as Son Goku was taken whole into a new system. Two fled immediately. Chomai vanished eastward into the farthest forests and marshlands, scattering luminous fragments of its presence across impossible distances to make tracking difficult. Seiken dissolved into hidden waters and mists, sinking so deep into remote wetlands and cave lakes that even Naruto's new perception lost clean hold of the beast's path. He felt both departures, not as failures, as data. Two had chosen survival through distance rather than pride through confrontation or alignment through shared grievance. That was not weakness. It was simply another kind of answer. Others drew nearer. Kokuo's presence hovered at the edge of engagement for an entire day before receding again, undecided. Aisabu turned cold attention toward the altered coasts and did not yet move. Juki remained distant but highly aware, his consciousness like disciplined thunder in the western sea range. And Kurama, within Naruto, became quieter than ever. The fox was no longer merely resident or source. His relation to Naruto had changed in the months since the Valley of the End. At first, he had been the instigator, the one who opened the wound instead of closing it. Then he became observer, perhaps expecting the transformation to either collapse or devour itself. But now Naruto had become something stable enough to host a court, alter nations, and incorporate other ancient powers. Kurama could no longer pretend this was temporary. Naruto felt that silence and knew the reckoning between them had finally ripened. It came at sunset, though the word had become increasingly symbolic. He descended alone into the deepest chamber beneath the fortress temple, a vault older than the visible monastery, cut directly into bedrock, polished smooth by centuries of forgotten ritual. There, at the center of a dark circular room, a black pool had formed where no spring fed it. Its surface reflected not the chamber ceiling, but a shifting starless sky. Naruto stood at its edge. "I know you're there," he said. The water stirred. Then the chamber expanded. Not physically, not in measurable stone dimensions, but in metaphysical depth, becoming once again that interior space where Naruto and Kurama had first spoken through bars and rage. Only the seal's old architecture no longer held. The corridor was gone. The iron bars had dissolved into black water and fractured gold light. The space was vast now, open, full of distant echoes from powers Naruto had taken and powers he had touched. At its center stood Kurama, not caged, not free in the ordinary sense either, simply present. The fox's 9 tails moved slowly behind him like living banners of ember-red darkness. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Kurama said, "You've become difficult to categorize." Naruto almost smiled. "I learned from the best." Kurama snorted. "That line used to sound more irritating when you were louder." Naruto approached across black water that did not ripple beneath his feet. "You didn't come to trade sarcasm." "No." Kurama's eyes, vast and old and molten with an intelligence honed through centuries of captivity, fixed on him fully. "I came," the fox said, "to ask the question I've been avoiding." Naruto waited, Kurama's tail stilled. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked, "or merely what I made possible when I opened you?" The chamber darkened. There it was, not accusation, not absolution. The true center of responsibility between them. Naruto looked at the fox in silence and let the question move through him completely before answering. He thought of the valley, the severed thread of destiny, the years of wanting acknowledgement, the village, the transformed leaf, the sovereign court, the cascade, Matatabi's accusation, Son Goku's fury, Sasuke's refusal to let anything become simple. He thought of how often pain offered itself as explanation for everything monstrous, and how often explanation became excuse. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Both." Kurama did not move. Naruto continued, "You opened the wound. You refused to push me back into the life that had already been carved around me. Without that, I would have died human, or lived human, shaped and hollow." His gaze sharpened. But what came after the opening was still choice, not once, repeatedly. Kurama listened without interruption. I chose not to go back, Naruto said. I chose not to pretend the world had earned my restoration. I chose to build instead of only destroy. I chose the court. Konoha, the cascade, the beasts, all of it. He paused, then finished with brutal simplicity. You made this possible. I made it true. Silence followed, the kind that felt like judgment and release at once. Kurama lowered his head fractionally. And that, he said softly, is the most honest answer either of us has ever spoken. Naruto studied him. You regret it? The fox's laugh was low and old and emptier than mockery. I regret many things. Regret is one of the few arts immortality teaches well. His eyes lifted. But no, not that. He looked around at the broken seal vastness they now shared. I spent centuries being made into a punishment, a weapon, a symbol of human fear. Then I spent years inside a boy who insisted on treating the world as though enough stubborn love could force it to become worthy of him. Naruto said nothing. Kurama's voice dropped lower still. I thought opening you was an act of spite. Maybe it was at first. The fox's tails shifted once slowly. But spite does not explain all of this, nor does rage, nor even pain. There is a terrible clarity in what you became. For the first time in the conversation, Naruto felt something in himself tighten, not from fear, from recognition of gravity. Kurama stepped closer. When you take the next step, the fox said, you won't remain a sovereign shaped like a man, not entirely. The more beasts, curses, griefs, and histories you devour, the less the world will treat you as singular life and the more it will treat you as era. Naruto met his gaze without retreat. I know. Do you? Kurama's eyes burned, because there is a cost beyond power. His words slowed, each one deliberate. The more you become weather, continent, concept, the harder it will be to remain answerable in the way living beings are answerable. You could rule forever and never again be reachable by grief, affection, doubt, or shame in the forms that once kept you human enough to question yourself. The chamber seemed to go deeper around them. Naruto absorbed this and found, to his own surprise, that the possibility did not horrify him as it should have months ago. Maybe that was the warning. Or maybe it was proof he had already crossed too far to evaluate the loss honestly. At length he said, "And you're telling me this now because—" Kurama looked at him a long time. "Because I wanted to know if there was still someone there capable of hearing it." Naruto held the fox's gaze. "There is." Kurama's expression became unreadable. Then, slowly, the great beast sat. It was not submission in the human sense. No beast like Kurama would ever kneel emotionally the way humans imagined loyalty, but the gesture carried finality. "I am tired," Kurama said. The words were simple. They struck harder than grand declarations. Tired of chains. Tired of hatred shaped by human fear. Tired of reacting to a world that never learned except through catastrophe. Tired of carrying enough power to distort eras, and yet still being used as an ingredient in someone else's politics. Naruto understood. Kurama lifted his head once more. "I will not be devoured as prey," he said. "No. I will not be wielded. No. I will merge," Kurama said, as acknowledgement. The chamber held stillness vast enough to be mistaken for reverence. Naruto stepped forward until he stood directly before the nine-tailed fox, no bars between them, no seal authority, no forced extraction. No desperation, just two beings tied together by history dark enough to outgrow sentiment. Kurama lowered his brow. Naruto raised his hand. When palm met fur, the chamber exploded into lightless gold. Roman 4. The ascension, the fusion of Kurama, was unlike what happened with Son Goku or Matatabi. No struggle, no translation through resistance, no forced rewriting of power into compatible form. It was agreement that made it far more dangerous. When the nine tails merged, Naruto did not merely gain more force. He inherited density. Centuries of hatred survived. Centuries of observation. The emotional scale of a being who had endured repeated weaponization without ever ceasing to remain vast inside it. Kurama's chakra, once blazing, feral, and easy to identify as tailed beast power, changed as it entered Naruto's malice resonance. It darkened, not in corruption but in integration, becoming something larger than beast chakra and colder than ordinary curse energy. Above the fortress temple, the sky died. No thunder, no cloudburst, no celestial spectacle in the theatrical sense. The light simply failed at the level of assumption. Afternoon dimmed into a black-violet twilight that stretched from horizon to horizon in less than a minute. Birds across entire provinces dropped from flight paths and fled for cover. Rivers reflected stars that were not visible overhead. In Koku no Sato, every lamp in the village guttered out at once and then relit with steady dark gold cores instead of ordinary flame. The sovereign court fell to one knee. Not because Naruto commanded it, because what rose from the vault below was no longer merely sovereign. It was primordial. The ground beneath the plateau split in concentric rings as black gold light erupted upward through stone, not destroying the temple but remaking its symbolic relationship to the land. Pillars straightened while remaining broken. Ruins became architecture again without ceasing to be ruins. The throne in the upper hall grew taller, then irrelevant, as the entire fortress temple itself began to resemble a throne complex viewed from the scale of weather and myth rather than masonry. Naruto emerged from the central chamber walking. That should have been impossible. The force around him should have reduced the visible world to rubble. Instead, it reorganized it. His form still appeared human at first glance, but only because human sight clung desperately to categories it was built to survive. In truth, he now occupied several scales at once. A young man in darkened shinobi garb, a continent-wide emotional pressure system, a living eclipse in the shape of decision. His whisker scars burned black gold. His eyes no longer merely swallowed light, they seemed to determine how much light nearby reality was allowed to keep. Kurama was not absent within him. Kurama was there everywhere in the new architecture, diffused as acknowledgement rather than separate resident. Yurei no Hana lowered her head almost to the ground. Tessen, who bowed to almost nothing, looked up with savage delight and a flicker of genuine awe. Komai said quietly, "The era just changed." Naruto stepped into the center of the roofless hall. Far beyond the plateau, every tailed beast still living felt it. Chomai froze in distant forest light, and knew hiding had only delayed the inevitable. Seiken recoiled in underwater caverns as pressure touched even the depths. Juki's disciplined consciousness sharpened into something like alarm. Kokuo lifted her head in a far plain and understood that neutrality had narrowed. Matatabi, weakened and watching from remote northern shadows, closed burning eyes and whispered a curse at fate. And Sasuke, traveling alone under a darkening sky between nations already unsteady, stopped dead in the road because for one perfect terrible instant he felt Naruto everywhere at once, not in body, but in implication. The world had not simply gained a stronger enemy, it had acquired a new condition. Naruto raised one hand. Across the continent, the quality of dusk changed. Not eternal night, not yet. The sun still rose and set. But from that day onward, every sunrise carried a faint veil over it, as if some immense hand held itself between world and warmth without fully blocking either. Colors lost a fraction of innocence. Shadows lasted a breath too long. Fear traveled more efficiently. Grief found echoes faster. Places already wounded by history darkened further simply because the atmosphere now permitted them to. Malice resonance had gone continental. Naruto stood in the hall and understood with total clarity that conventional measurement no longer applied. Strongest ninja, cage tier, tailed beast tier. Those categories belonged to a ladder he had stepped off entirely. He was no longer climbing power. He was becoming environment. That realization should have exhilarated him. Instead, it left him very, very still, because Kurama had been right. There was no triumph here, only magnitude. Magnitude carried past a threshold where the ordinary emotional rewards of victory ceased to matter. Shukaku laughed once softly, almost reverently from where he crouched at the edge of the hole. "Well," the one-tail said, "that certainly ruined everyone's week." Tessin barked a delighted laugh with him. Naruto did not respond immediately. He was listening to the world, not in metaphor. Literally. Whole regions now hummed in his awareness. Fear in border forts. Reverence and terror in Koku no Sato as the altered villagers looked up into wrong-colored evening and understood, however dimly, that their king had stepped beyond the category of ruler into something less negotiable. The distant tension of foreign villages feeling pressure without source. The beasts, the dead, the sovereign court, the land itself reacting like an animal sensing a greater predator had just risen to its full height. At length Naruto spoke. His voice did not echo, the hall echoed around it. "It begins now." Komai bowed deeper. "Yes." Naruto looked upward through the roofless temple at the black-violet sky. The word "begins" would once have excited him. It used to imply hope, possibility, a fresh chance to prove himself to a world reluctant to grant acknowledgement freely. Now it meant something colder, the beginning of a world no longer allowed to pretend it had not been judged. Yurei no Hana lifted her pale gaze. "What do you feel?" The question might once have been intimate. From her, it was diagnostic. Naruto answered honestly because dishonesty no longer offered him anything. "Everything," he said, then, after a pause, "and less than I should." The court understood the weight of that. Komai because ruin always knew what scale did to the moral senses of those who wielded it. Yurei no Hana because grief recognized distance even when dressed as transcendence. Kurohane because hunger had long since learned how abundance hollows savor. Tessin because wrath, beneath all noise, knew that becoming too great to be touched also meant becoming too great to be satisfied. And somewhere in the new architecture of Naruto's being, Kurama understood best of all. The last image before the NEWAGE, that night if it could still be called night, when darkness had begun informing the day, as well Naruto walked alone beyond the fortress temple to the plateau's edge. Below him stretched a world dimmed but not dead. That mattered. Villages still burned cooking fires. Roads still carried travelers. Children still asked questions adults could not answer. The age had not ended in one grand annihilation. It had simply lost the right to imagine itself permanent. Naruto stood there with continental dusk in his lungs and looked out at the land that had made him hero, vessel, weapon, orphan, symbol, rival, and now something without category. He felt no joy, no clean sorrow either. Just stillness vast enough to frighten even him if he stared at it too directly. Far away, in the altered heart of Koku no Sato, people looked toward the horizon and whispered his name in prayer, fear, or disbelief. Farther still, in nations not yet conquered but already leaning, leaders wrote orders by lamplight and felt their authority thinning. And somewhere on a road with no clear allegiance left to claim, Sasuke Uchiha continued walking beneath the dimmed sky, because stopping would mean accepting that the world now had a ruler honest enough to be monstrous and monstrous enough to feel inevitable. Naruto closed his eyes. When he opened them, void gold light moved across the continent like the afterimage of a new moon. The primordial sovereign had risen. And from this height, every shadow in the shinobi world was beginning to remember what it had once been before sunlight made promises it could not keep. Chapter 6. The world reshaped 5 years later, the world did not look ruined. That was the most unsettling part. If someone had stood at the edge of the old shinobi era and tried to imagine its end, they would have pictured battlefields split open by biju bombs, mountains shattered into dust, cities reduced to molten skeletons, rivers poisoned black with chakra fallout, and the sky permanently broken like stained glass after war. They would have imagined apocalypse in obvious terms because obvious apocalypse allowed the survivors to say a thing had been lost. But the world Naruto made did not end through spectacle. It ended through replacement. Life continued. Children were still born. Bread still baked. Markets still opened. People still argued over small household matters, repaired sandals, carried water, flirted awkwardly, worried over fevers, buried the dead, told stories, and found reasons to laugh on evenings when the wrong-colored sky felt farther away than usual. Roads were safer than they had been during the last major cycle of hidden village conflict. Border skirmishes had nearly vanished. Mercenary work still existed, but without the old village arms race behind it, it had changed shape into something meaner in small places and less devastating at scale. The world had not become peaceful, it had become settled. That difference was everything. No one trained anymore to become Hawkage. No child in the former 5 great nations stood in a schoolyard and declared with wide-eyed fire that they would one day lead a village whose banner mattered more than the banners around it. The very concept had thinned. The old offices technically survived in some regions for a while. Administrators, local governors, transition councils, hereditary lines pretending continuity still meant legitimacy, but everyone knew these structures existed under a larger weather system. The real sovereignty lived elsewhere, at the edge of maps and yet over all of them, in the plateau fortress temple that had grown into a black gold citadel without ever fully ceasing to be a ruin, in Koku no Sato, once Konoha, where dusk had never lifted, and in Naruto Uzumaki, now less a man than the fixed center of an era. The shinobi system had not been crushed by military defeat alone. It had been made spiritually obsolete. There was no point in amassing armies when one presence could alter the emotional climate of continents. No point in stockpiling tailed beasts when the oldest one now existed as acknowledgement within the primordial sovereign. And the others either hid, submitted, or adapted to a new order where villages could no longer pretend ownership over forces that dwarfed them. No point in teaching generations of children that loyalty to hidden nations was the highest form of belonging when everyone knew those nations had survived only by accepting, resisting, or being reinterpreted beneath the shadow that now lay over the world. People still called themselves citizens of places, but fewer and fewer believed those places were ultimate. That was the real victory. The world had stopped imagining itself capable of returning. Koku no Sato, the village of eternal dusk, did not resemble conquered territory. It resembled a place that had accepted a difficult climate and adjusted its architecture around it. Its streets were still the old leaf streets in shape, but the colors had deepened, sharpened, matured into something more severe. Wood houses had been reinforced with dark lacquered beams that seemed grown rather than built. Paper lanterns glowed with dim amber-black light at evening instead of honest gold. Roof tiles held traces of black crystal along their edges, not enough to make them monstrous, only enough to remind everyone that the very material world in Koku no Sato had learned new preferences. The Hawkage monument remained above the village, but time, or something more intentional than time, had weathered the carved faces into half-faded presences. Moss and shadow clung to them together. The old leaders had not been erased. They had been left visible as the sort of history one outgrows without fully forgiving. The academy still functioned. That surprised outsiders most when they first heard it. Children still learned chakra control, taijutsu fundamentals, reading, writing, practical survival, local governance, and all the 1,000 little skills societies need if they mean to continue existing instead of simply enduring. But they were not taught the will of fire. Not as doctrine. Not as sacred inheritance. That kind of idealistic nationalism had become embarrassing under the new order, too naive even to rebel against properly. Instead, they were taught structure. They learned that the world contained forces larger than human law, and that wise societies survived by understanding them honestly rather than dressing dependence up as heroism. They learned village history without the moral perfumes once layered over it. They learned what Konoha had been, what it had done to its own children, to other nations, to tailed beasts, to itself. They learned not to sentimentalize survival. Some older teachers called this cynicism in private. The younger ones called it education. Naruto rarely visited the academy. He did not need to. His shadow lived in the village regardless. That, too, people adapted to. On some mornings, the sky over Koku no Sato was almost beautiful, a permanent twilight painted in bruised purples, dark rose, faint veils of gold too dim to be called sunrise, yet soft enough that rooftops glowed in subtle gradients. Visitors expecting screaming terror found instead a city breathing under altered rules. Civilians did not cower in the streets. Merchants bargained. Laundry still hung across narrow courtyards. Small shrines existed in corners, though prayers said at them had become more cautious and less entitled. The horror was not constant violence, it was normalization. People had made lives here. They had gotten used to the dusk. Roman II, the family on Inari Street in a narrow lane off the former market district, on what used to be called Inari Street, before maps began labeling it simply East Lantern Quarter, lived a family of 4 in a 2-story house with black beams, plum-colored shutters, and a courtyard garden that grew night-blooming flowers better than daylight-loving ones. Their names were Aki, Ren, Hana, and little Daichai. None of them had ever known a Konoha untouched by Naruto's transformation, except Aki, who had been 12 when the leaf became Koku no Sato, and whose memories of bright afternoons had grown blurred around the edges, like old photographs left in damp air too long. She woke before the others most mornings. Habit. The kind people develop when raising children in a world where the sky felt observant. This morning was no different. She slid quietly from bed, wrapped a dark shawl over her shoulders, and crossed the house in stockinged steps while the village still held its soft pre-dawn hush. The kitchen brazier was easy to relight. Tea leaves went into the pot. Dough she had prepared the night before came out smooth beneath practiced hands. Through the paper window, she could see the street lantern outside still glowing with that peculiar amber-black flame all dusk lamps in the village seemed to prefer now. It was peaceful. That was what unsettled outsiders when they came under controlled escort and looked around too long. They wanted visible misery. It made moral judgment easier, but peace, or something adjacent to it, had taken root. Ren came downstairs soon after, hair still untidy from sleep, and nodded a quiet greeting as he began slicing vegetables for the morning meal. He had once been a genin candidate in the old academy, too young for the real shinobi wars, and old enough to remember how adults used to talk about becoming strong for the village. Now he worked in infrastructure maintenance, overseeing repairs to district drainage channels and keeping black crystal growth from overrunning load-bearing beams where its spread became structurally inconvenient rather than merely symbolic. Their daughter Hana, 9, arrived next with her school satchel already half-packed and questions already forming, as children's questions always did faster than breakfast. Daichai followed in her wake at 5 years old, still rubbing one eye and carrying a wooden fox carved by a neighbor. The family ate together on floor cushions in the dim morning light. Hana tore bread in half and asked, "Is it true the sky used to be bright all the way until evening?" Aki and Ren exchanged a glance. Questions like that came more often lately. Children born into dusk inevitably became curious about what adults sounded nostalgic about only when they forgot themselves. "It was," Aki said. Hana frowned as if trying to imagine a world so impractical. "All day, mostly. What did people do with it?" Ren huffed a laugh into his tea. "Same things they do now. Work, complain, make too much noise." "But wasn't it strange?" Hana pressed. Aki looked toward the window. Memory answered not in images, but in texture. Sunlight on academy walls, heat on the back of her neck during summer errands, shadows that ended cleanly instead of lingering. She could still remember those things. Yet the emotional meaning of them had gone soft. Not because she had been forced to forget, because years of different weather had changed what her body understood as normal. "It felt normal because it was what we had," she said. Hana accepted this the way children accepted most unsatisfying truths, by storing them for later re-examination. Daichai, chewing slowly, asked, "Will it ever come back?" No one spoke for a moment, not because the question was forbidden, because it belonged to the category of things adults in Koku no Sato learned to answer carefully, especially around children who were intelligent enough to sense hesitation and not yet practiced enough to disguise their reactions to it. Ren set down his cup. "I don't think so," he said. Daichai nodded as if this were weather information and returned to his bread. That, more than the question itself, tightened something in Aki's chest, not because the answer was tragic, because it was ordinary. After breakfast, the family stepped into the lane with the other quarter residents beginning their day. A courier cart rolled past. Two academy students in dark uniforms hurried by arguing over a tactics exercise. Somewhere farther down the street, a shopkeeper lifted shutters while grumbling that the lantern inspectors were stricter this month than last. Life, all of it life, and overhead the sky remained beautifully wrong. As Aki walked Hana and Daichai toward the academy annex, she passed the small memorial wall at the end of the quarter where older names from the Leaf era had been preserved under glass. The village kept such things. It did not destroy memory indiscriminately. It curated it under new interpretation. A woman stood there already, leaving fresh white flowers beneath one panel. Aki recognized her vaguely from another district. Widow, perhaps, or sister. Hard to know. Grief wore quieter clothes in Koku no Sato than people expected. The woman touched the memorial stone once and stepped away with no obvious breakdown, no theatrical mourning, just a measured silence that suggested sorrow had learned to live beside routine. Hana tugged her mother's sleeve. "Why do people still leave flowers for the old names?" Aki glanced at the wall, because memory had not been outlawed, because being reshaped was not the same as having one's dead erased, because some loves survived political weather even when the meanings around them changed. "Because they mattered," she said. "Do they still?" Aki looked down at her daughter. "Yes," she said after a moment, "just differently." That was the lesson of the age, though no one called it that to children. Everything still mattered, just differently. Roman 3. A world that had adapted elsewhere, the nations had settled into their new postures. Suna still stood, but the role of Kazekij had softened into something less mythic and more administrative. Gara remained respected, perhaps even loved, but the old model of village supremacy through military exceptionalism had died with the era that birthed it. The sand now governed trade corridors, border water agreements, and internal clan equilibrium under the long knowledge that higher atmospheric sovereignty did not belong to them. Kiri had become meticulous to the point of cultural ritual. After the years of uncertainty Mume had inflicted, the former mist rebuilt itself around procedures checked by multiple overlapping offices. It remained beautiful and dangerous and suspicious of easy narratives. There were some who said Kiri had, in a strange way, benefited most from the new age of village already accustomed to distrusting its own history, found it less humiliating than others to admit power had moved beyond old national myths. Kumo retained its pride more openly than the rest, but it had become leaner in what it claimed. The Rakeage office still mattered, yet nobody in the cloud mistook local strength for supreme authority anymore. Their people trained hard because the cloud knew no other honest way to live, not because they believed muscles and lightning alone could now dictate continental fate. That humility sat uneasily on them, which perhaps made it genuine. Iwa endured as only stone could. Its roads were still stable, its walls still heavy, its engineers still half-priests in the way they spoke about maintenance. Yet there was a softness in its political doctrine, now not kindness exactly, but a resigned precision. The stone had learned permanence was rented. That lesson had made it less arrogant and more careful. No nation called itself free in the old grand style anymore. That rhetoric had become embarrassing under a sky everyone knew could darken further at a thought not their own. And yet the world had not become a wasteland of kneeling slaves either. This was the part most old rebels, if any had survived unchanged enough to articulate it, would have hated most. People adapted. They did not all love Naruto. Far from it. In some places, his name was spoken with reverence, in others with bitter caution, in others with a complicated quiet that implied both gratitude for the end of large-scale war and loathing for the terms on which that end had been achieved. But ordinary lives do not suspend themselves forever for philosophical purity. Given enough stability, people build homes even in the shadow of terrible truths. Naruto had understood that long ago. That was why he had never wanted ashes alone. Ashes teach too little. Continuity under altered terms teaches everything. Roman 4. Sakura in the medical quarter of Koku no Sato, beneath roofs reinforced against the subtle pressure fluctuations that sometimes accompanied shifts in the village's emotional climate. Sakura Haruno still worked. She did not wear the uniform she once wore as a loyal daughter of the leaf. Those symbols had thinned. But she remained unmistakably herself in the ways that mattered, straight-backed, precise, eyes too sharp to let routine numb the places in her that still refused certain answers. She had been offered higher office more than once in the years after the transformation settled. Not by Naruto personally, never by him. That was its own kind of calculated cruelty or respect, depending on how one read his silences. Instead, the offers had come through governance intermediaries, through Komai's structural reordering, through pragmatic necessity. Koku no Sato needed a medical system both functional and trusted, and Sakura was too competent to waste. She accepted only those authorities directly related to treatment, training, and hospital management. She refused ceremonial titles and any phrasing that suggested enthusiastic participation in the ideology of dusk. No one forced the matter. Even now, Naruto understood the difference between useful resistance and empty provocation. That, too, infuriated her sometimes. This evening she stood on the hospital's upper balcony looking over the village as dusk folded into its permanent deeper version. Below her, nurses changed shifts, orderlies wheeled supplies between wings, and somewhere in the children's ward someone laughed too loudly at a story clearly intended to distract from pain. Life again. Stubborn, repetitive life. Behind her, footsteps approached softly enough that only long practice made her identify them before sound fully arrived. "Kakashi-sensei," she said without turning. He stopped beside her at the railing. Age had touched him the way it touches certain dangerous men, selectively. His hair had not improved, his posture remained deceptively loose, but there was more stillness in him now, less of the old performative indifference. The covered eye remained covered. The visible one held dusk the way old glass holds reflected fire. "You could have pretended not to notice," he said. "You're later than usual. I had to explain to a council functionary why surgical schedules don't care about ceremonial transit windows." Sakura almost smiled. Did they survive? Barely. That small exchange passed between them like a preserved artifact from another age, familiar, dry. Safe because it avoided larger topics. For a while they stood in silence. Then Kakashi said, "He's been quieter lately." Sakura's hands tightened slightly on the balcony rail. She knew who he meant. In Koku no Sato, people often avoided Naruto's name in casual speech not from explicit prohibition, but because too much of the environment seemed to listen differently when it was spoken. Not always, not dramatically, but enough to shape habit. "Quieter how?" she asked. "Less direct pressure on the village," Kakashi said. "More attention turned outward or inward." He paused. "Hard to tell with him now." Sakura looked over the altered rooftops toward the monument beyond. "I don't know whether that's better. No, it probably means he's changing again." Kakashi did not deny it. That was another thing time had altered. In the early years after Naruto's ascension, many of those who still cared for him in the old personal way clung to a cycle of interpretation. Perhaps this next phase would soften him. Perhaps some remnant of the old boy would resurface enough to reverse course. Perhaps enough patience or enough resistance or enough love would make the center crack. Those hopes had not died entirely. Hope rarely dies cleanly, but it had become more specific, less romantic. Now the question was not whether Naruto would suddenly become the old self again. No one sane believed that. The question was whether the part of him still capable of being reached by recognition rather than merely opposed by force remained meaningfully present at all. Sakura turned to look at Kakashi properly. "Do you ever think we lost him before the valley?" she asked. The older man regarded the village below. "I think," he said slowly, "that the valley made visible something the world had been helping create for a long time." Sakura exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh and not at all one. "That's not comforting. I wasn't trying to comfort you, I know." They fell quiet again. The first stars were faint tonight, half muted by the wrong atmospheric veil that now lived over the continent. From somewhere far off, temple bells sounded the hour in the old style preserved under new regime. The sound moved through Koku no Sato without anyone commenting on whether it belonged more to religion, civic routine, or the habits of a people who had stopped needing those categories cleanly separated. Sakura finally said, "I still hate him sometimes." Kakashi's eye remained on the sky. "Yes. And I still—" She stopped. Words resisted, not because the feeling was absent, because even now, after years, its shape embarrassed simple language. Love survived, not the teenage version, not the version that believed closeness alone entitled anyone to restoration. Something harder, angrier, less forgiving, but undeniably still there in altered form, the same way the village had survived in altered form. Kakashi saved her from finishing. "Of course you do," he said. That was all. No judgment. No demand that she choose cleaner loyalties than the world permitted. It was enough. The one who refused to belong Sasuke Uchiha returned only when he decided the question had ripened enough to deserve asking. Years had moved strangely for him. He had not founded resistance movements, though many would have followed him had he tried. He had not joined the new order. He had not disappeared entirely either, though there were months at a time when his name moved through rumor more than sight. He had become what Komai had once called him in cold accuracy, witness. Not passive witness, not neutral, something more difficult. A man moving through the world refusing both surrender and easy rebellion, measuring what the age had become and whether any line remained worth drawing even if it could no longer guarantee victory. He had seen villages adapt. He had seen children grow up without the old shinobi nationalism in their bones. He had seen fewer wars and stranger kinds of fear. He had seen corruption continue in local forms because no era abolishes pettiness, only changes what it must hide from. He had seen bandits invoke Naruto's name in places that had never known him, and he had cut them down without asking whether that made him tacitly useful to the order he distrusted. He had seen enough to know this world was not simply hell. That was the problem. If it had been hell, opposition would have been easy, but the new age had ended certain horrors while sanctifying others. It had reduced mass warfare, but under cosmic coercion. It had made nations more honest, but under fear. It had stabilized a continent by centering it around a ruler too vast to be elected, corrected, or fully understood. It had cut out the lies. It had also cut out choice in ways subtler than chains. Sasuke came back because he needed to ask the only question left that still mattered personally. He reached the plateau fortress temple at dusk. The citadel had grown beyond its early ruined grandeur. Towers leaned like broken vows. Bridges spanned chasms where there had once been ordinary courtyards. Black gold crystal traced old stone lines without obscuring them, making the entire structure look like a sacred site and a wound layered atop each other, until architecture and aftermath became the same thing. No guards stopped him. There were guards, in a sense, creatures of shadow, sovereign attendance, altered sentries woven from the citadel's conceptual edges, but none interfered. Sasuke's arrival had been expected the moment he crossed the plateau boundary. He climbed the final stair alone. At the highest terrace, where once monks or warlords or forgotten abbots might have surveyed armies and valleys, Naruto stood with his back to the steps. The sky beyond him looked dimmer than elsewhere, not because clouds gathered, but because light itself seemed less eager to remain whole in his immediate vicinity. Sasuke stopped a few paces away. For a while neither spoke. Then Naruto said, "You took your time." Sasuke looked at the broad land stretching below the citadel. "I wanted to see what kind of world you'd actually make." And the old answer would have come fast, bitter, certain. Sasuke had once lived on that kind of clarity. Now he let the silence do its work first. "It's worse than the old world in some ways," he said, "and better in others." Naruto turned. He looked younger than the era he ruled and older than the categories youth belonged to. That contradiction had only intensified. His face still held the structure of the boy Sasuke had fought at the valley, but the scale behind his eyes made ordinary adulthood seem irrelevant. "That's a real answer," Naruto said. "You didn't ask for comfort." "No," Sasuke stepped closer. "The wars are fewer," he said. "The villages lie less. People have stopped pretending sacrifice automatically makes authority moral. Children aren't being raised for the same kinds of patriotic delusions." His voice hardened. "But none of that makes this free." Naruto's expression did not change. "I didn't promise freedom." "I know." That was the core of it. Naruto had, in fact, been far more honest than the old system about what he offered. Order, exposure, continuity without comforting myths, stability under shadow. He had never sold it as liberation in the bright heroic sense. That was precisely why condemning him required more than reciting old moral phrases. Sasuke met his gaze fully. "Did you ever want to be saved?" Naruto did not answer at once. The wind moved through the terrace, carrying the scent of black stone after evening chill and something older beneath its shrines. Dust, distant rain. Centuries of weather the plateau now seemed to remember all at once. He looked away from Sasuke and out over the dimmed world. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than almost any ruler's had a right to be while answering a question of this size. "I wanted to be known." Sasuke remained still. Naruto continued, the words measured not for effect, but because their truth deserved exact shape. "That's not the same thing." People kept offering saving as if rescue was the highest form of love, as if returning me to whatever role hurt least to imagine was kindness. His eyes lowered fractionally, but being saved usually meant being put back into a story that made other people comfortable. Sasuke's jaw tightened. That was unfair. It was also, in too many cases, correct. "I decided," Naruto said, "that I preferred understanding to rescue." The evening around them deepened. Sasuke studied him a long time. The answer did not erase anything. It did not justify conquest or soften the dead, or resolve the horror of an era ruled by one wounded will made vast enough to become climate. But it explained something fundamental that had remained missing all these years. Naruto had never only been rejecting help. He had been rejecting interpretation that came preloaded with other people's needs. Sasuke hated how much sense that made, and because he hated it, he asked the harder question. Was there another way? Naruto's gaze finally returned to him. 1,000 possible answers lived inside that silence. Maybe, once, before, not after the valley, not in the world they inherited, not without changing too many people who had no interest in changing until fear made them. At length Naruto said, "There are always other ways." Sasuke frowned. "Then why this one?" Naruto looked out over the world again. "Because this is the one no one else was willing to choose." That answer would have sounded like arrogance from almost anyone else. From Naruto, it sounded like diagnosis and condemnation braided together. Sasuke exhaled slowly. He knew, then, that this was the closest he would come to a confession. Not remorse. Not apology, but explanation stripped clean enough to stand without euphemism. The old desire to fight rose in him once more, not because he thought he could win cleanly, but because the body remembers older languages when the soul has no better one. Yet even that urge had changed. A duel now would not settle the world's argument, it would only dramatize it. Naruto watched him understand that. "You're not here to kill me," Naruto said. "No, you're not here to kneel." "No." Something like the faintest echo of old familiarity touched Naruto's face. "That sounds like you." Sasuke almost laughed, but the sound never formed. He sheathed the hand that had drifted near his sword without realizing. Then he said the truest thing available to him. I still don't know whether you ended the lie or just made it impossible to breathe without one. For the first time in the conversation, Naruto's stillness shifted, not much. But enough. It might have been appreciation, it might have been irritation. It might have been the recognition that some questions remain alive precisely because no empire, however honest, can fully answer them without incriminating itself. That, Naruto said softly, is why you're still useful. Sasuke's mouth thinned at the edges. I'll try not to feel honored. Don't. The wind moved between them again. At length, Sasuke turned toward the stairs. He did not ask permission to leave. He would not have accepted it if given. Naruto did not stop him. Halfway down the terrace, Sasuke paused without looking back. Do you ever regret it? He asked. There was a long silence behind him. Then Naruto answered, regret belongs to smaller scales than I live at now. Sasuke closed his eyes once. When he opened them, he finished descending. That answer was not the whole truth. He knew that. Naruto knew he knew that. But perhaps some rulers become too large to admit regret in the old personal grammar without cracking what they've built. Or perhaps regret had truly changed shape inside him, spread too thin across continents to resemble the intimate wound it once was. Either way, Sasuke left with the question not resolved, only sharpened. That felt fitting. He would continue walking, not because movement alone gave purpose. Because in a world that had accepted dusk as climate, someone still needed to keep alive the possibility that understanding and surrender were not identical, even when the difference between them became nearly impossible to enforce. VI. The final height, the last image of the age, belonged to Naruto alone, not because he demanded privacy, because certain heights have no companions, only witnesses at lower elevations. He stood atop the weathered face of the Hokage monument one evening, not on a flat ceremonial platform built for rulers, but directly upon the old carved stone itself, where time and shadow and new growth had half consumed the features of the men who once imagined they could guide history through titles and succession. Moss clung to the rock. Fine black crystal traced the old carving lines like a second script written over the first. Roots from cliffside growth had reached down in slow, patient veins, making it look as though the mountain itself had begun reclaiming the monument without erasing it fully. Below him stretched Koku no Sato. Lanterns glowed like low stars in the streets. Rooftops held pools of dark violet light. Somewhere dinner fires had begun. Somewhere an argument over prices or chores or schoolwork carried through an open window. Somewhere a child asked what the world had looked like before dusk, and an adult chose an answer careful enough not to sound either nostalgic or afraid. Beyond the village lay the rest of the continent, all of it dimmed, all of it still moving. Naruto looked over it without triumph. That was what a younger self might have expected, the exultation of finally being seen by everyone, known by everyone, impossible to ignore. But triumph belonged to moments, and he had outgrown moments. What remained was something larger and less satisfying: completion without peace, dominion without rest, truth without comfort. He had become exactly what he chose to be. There was terrible stillness in that. The old carvings beneath his feet had once symbolized dreams people believed noble enough to pass from generation to generation untouched. Naruto stood above them not as vandal or avenger, but as the inheritor who had found the inheritance dishonest and rewritten its terms by force. The wind moved through the valley below. He closed his eyes briefly across the world. Prayers whispered in fear, habit, gratitude, resentment, obedience, and uncertainty. His name lived in all of them differently. In some regions it had become title, in others warning. In a few rare places, still memory. The shadows lengthened. Children learned. Old leaders adapted or died. The world continued under the weight of what it now knew. He had never truly wanted the world to love him. Love had been too unstable, too easily redirected by convenience, too often offered on conditions that made it a bargain instead of a gift. He had wanted to be known. Now the world knew him in every possible register: dread, order, history, weather, law, grief, atmosphere. Every shadow in every village, every wrong-colored dawn, every prayer said more carefully than before. Every silence after someone spoke his name, they all knew him. And standing on the half-consumed monument of an age he had ended without fully destroying, Naruto Uzumaki looked out at the dimmed world with the absolute, terrible stillness of someone who had mistaken no part of his own becoming for innocence. There was no joy in his face, no sorrow simple enough to read, only sovereignty vast enough to feel like climate. Below him, life continued; above him, the sky remained veiled. And everywhere between, the world he had reshaped breathed in the dark and remembered his name.